call this meeting to order of the Finance and Labor Relations Committee. Item number 2, disclosure of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Seeing none. Item 3, delegations. We have an addenda to the agenda on that. A request for delegation by Mike Sullivan. Could I get a mover? Oh, Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, if I could just get a motion to adopt the addendum and then proceed forward with a motion to hear the presentation.
Of course. Could I get a motion? Councillor Ritzman, Councillor Henderson. All those in favor? Carried. Item 3.1, request for delegation by Mike Sullivan. Can I get a mover? Councillor Burback and Councillor 7. All those in favor? That's carried. Is Mr. Sullivan available?
Through the chair, we are just working to connect Mr. Sullivan now.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, members of council. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, go ahead whenever you're ready, Mr. Sullivan.
Thank you very much for allowing me to attend, and happy Robbie Burns Day. First, let me congratulate you on declaring a climate emergency 2 years ago. And again, congratulations on setting yourselves a challenging target of a 30% reduction by 2030 in just 8 short years. And finally, congratulations on voting for the report of the climate change coordinators in October. It sets out some various serious actions to be taken by council. The first of those actions was to hire a climate change team. Yet here we are discussing the first budget following adoption of the report, and there is no mention of hiring any team. The only action seems to be to somehow find time in the workdays of existing staff to create working groups to deal with the actions necessary to reach the promised 30% goal. And I'll bet you won't find a whole lot of staff who say they have lots and lots of spare time. The declaration of an emergency 2 years ago has not been met with an emergency response. Since then, one would be hard pressed to find actions by council commensurate with an emergency. In fact, every department seems to be operating on the same business as usual basis as they were 2 years ago. There is as yet no climate lens for decision making, and despite the request of the Energy and Environment Committee, no incentives or LICs or PACE programs have been set up to encourage GHG reduced development. Indeed, on your very agenda today is a voluminous report by Blackline Consulting that's taken almost 2 years to prepare, of a service delivery review commissioned in May of 2020 after the declaration of a climate emergency. And there is zero reference in the report to climate change, to adaptation, to greenhouse gas reduction, or any of the issues that are referenced in the climate change report. The Blackline report deals with vehicles and their use, yet makes no mention of the operating cost savings of using electric vehicles. Many of the city services referred to will need to be reviewed in light of trying to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, yet the report is silent on that issue. And that's just but one example of decisions and actions by the council that seem to have ignored the fact that we are, in fact, in a climate emergency. So it is clear to this observer that Stratford needs help in designing and implementing appropriate actions as outlined in the climate change report. That help will come in the form of hiring the climate change team as recommended in the report. I therefore ask council to place in the budget the funding for a position of climate change coordinator. You could place the funding for all 3 positions, but I note that there is some indication that there may be some funding coming from other levels of the county. So that may be how you can get around hiring all three, but you have to at least hire the one. And other members of that team can be hired following discussions with the other council in the county. So if you have any, that's all my comments. If you have any questions, I'd be pleased to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Sullivan. I appreciate your time you've taken in your report. Does anybody have any questions for Mr. Sullivan? See none. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
On to item number 4, report of the fire chief. 4.1, airport's financial sustainability study consultant costs. Chief, go right ahead.
Through the chair. So this report, we put together, gathered the information over the last week that council was looking for. So this report is to identify potential costs to retain a consultant to conduct a study on the Stratford Municipal Airport's financial sustainability and to seek direction of council. So on the 17th January 2022 budget deliberations, council passed a motion that a review of the 2022 draft airport budget be referred to staff to explore revenue expansion opportunities to reduce the annual cost of operating the airport. Then again, on December 14, 2021, for the 2022 budget deliberations, council passed a motion that staff be directed to prepare a report detailing the cost to retain a consultant for the purpose of undertaking a review of the Stratford Airport, and specifically on whether it can be made financially sustainable and on the options available to the city if it can't be made financially sustainable. Then during the 2020 budget deliberations, council passed a motion that staff review the airport fees in order to move towards a cost recovery model. So staff, after reviewing these 3 motions and council looking for cost for a study, we thought it was prudent to kind of encompass everything all together. If council approves a study, then everything can be captured. All 3 motions could be captured under that study. I have attached the 2015 Airport Economic Impact Analysis Report in case any council member may have forgot what was in that report. It is 7 years ago. And a copy of the 2021 Service Delivery Review. Now, the Service Delivery Review, the objective of the 2021 Service Delivery Review was to identify any ways that services or service delivery could be improved, whether through technology integration of services to allow economies of scale, structure realignment, or increased revenue generation. So under the airport, the review came up with 3 alternatives for determining how to reduce losses. In other words, to make the airport revenue neutral or revenue positive. So one of those alternatives that they came up with, or recommendations, was to increase fees. So in this 2022 budget, we have increased fees. Landing fees were increased by 50% for 2022, 7% for jet fuel, and 2.75% for avgas, more or less to see how much of an impact, how much revenue it's going to create, but also the impact on the users to see if we're still going to get the same volume of fuel sales and landing fees than the previous fee charges. Also within the report or the service delivery review, one of the recommendations was expanding the hangar space. So we applied for, when the opportunity came up, a $1.5 million grant. And we're still waiting to see the results of that grant, but we haven't been told that we didn't receive the grant, but we haven't received information that we have. But it was put on hold due to COVID, but we understand that those applications are being reviewed again. The third and final alternative or recommendation in the service delivery review was selling the airport. And in the review, it gave pros and cons for selling the airport, and it gave the financials. So what they look like currently, what they would look like if it was sold as an airport, and what it would look like, how much the city would get if it was sold as an airport, and what ongoing cost would be as an airport, but being privately run, and how much the city would get if it was sold as private land, basically agricultural, and then what it would cost the city after that. And it basically came up, the city would essentially get, if it's sold as land, you get a one-time revenue, and then the airport's gone forever. But if it was sold as an airport, the city would no longer have the cost of running an airport, but the city would still gain the economic benefits of there still being an airport there. So when we looked at that, when staff looked at that, and we saw that what council is essentially looking for in a new study, a lot of that information is already in the service delivery review. So if you will look at the financial section, a cost of a new study for making it revenue neutral or revenue positive and sustainability, it's going to be in the 20 to 40,000 range is what we've been able to determine by reaching out, sought reach outs to consultants in that field. We did prepare some criteria in the analysis section in front of you. 9 different sets of criteria, which could be expanded or shortened, depending on council's needs. But if the information is in the service delivery review, staff would be happy to expand on those recommendations and bring that back free of charge in hopes that council can make a decision instead of spending the 20 to 40,000. But if you feel in the service delivery review, it doesn't meet quite what the information isn't in depth enough, then these criteria hopefully would meet those requirements, and council could decide if they still wish to have that spend the funds on the new study. Now, it is not clear, we never got the information back substantially enough to put in this report, is if consultants in this field have the capabilities to conduct this study through a climate change lens on the airport. They can do everything else of those 9 criteria, but it's not clear yet if they can do it through a climate change lens. If this is found not to be feasible, it is staff's intent to reach out to the University of Waterloo, and if not them, then another university, to offer up the airport as a learning opportunity for a free climate change study of the airport while providing education opportunity for students studying in this particular field. So the financial impact, as I touched on, we found this type of study would come in the $20,000 to $40,000 range. The link to asset management plan and strategy, the alignment with strategic priorities came into strengthening our plan, strategies, and partnerships and developing our resources. And alignment with One Planet principles, we found equity in local economy and culture and community aligned with those principles. And the staff recommendation that the report of the fire chief detailing the cost to retain a consultant for the purpose of undertaking a review of the Stratford Airport be received for information, and that direction be given to initiate the study subject to 2022 budget approval. And I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Chief. Does anybody have any questions? Councilor Vasilakos.
More of a comment. I think if you hired a consultant to do a review of the airport and they didn't have the capacity in-house to do a climate change review, that is something that they could bring in. Consultants like bring in specialists all the time. So it could actually be integrated into a single report if that were the case. I will say that the service delivery review does a very good job of highlighting, doing a broad overview of the potential for the airport and what may or may not be possible. But I think we've been through this exercise, 2 or 3 years, and I think we do need something a little more detailed and laying out the options for us in those 9 plus climate change. And so I know there's going to be other discussion, but I would be happy to move the staff recommendation and then also provide direction to move ahead with that study.
Thank you, Councillor. Could I get a seconder for that motion? Councillor Burback. Any further questions or comments? Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Can I just clarify that the direction for this study, is that different than the expansion request from the airport, or is that similar?
So Through the chair, this study would be all encompassing. It would take in all of those requests. So any expansion opportunities. So expansion opportunities is basically what can be done to increase revenue, or neutral, revenue positive. It's just different wording, but it's saying the same thing.
Okay, thank you. And I guess I'm just going to speak, I guess I'm not really in favor of adding this to the budget this year. I think it might be more appropriate to add that money next year. So I would be in support of doing this in the 2020, well, next year budget, but not this time. So.
Thank you. Council Clifford.
Yeah, I was just going to ask if we have a reserve that we could take this out of. Is there any, I'll ask our Director of Corporate Services if we have anything that could be taken out of a reserve.
The chair. So the airport does have a capital reserve intended for maybe this type of thing, but usually future capital expansions. And as we've been outlining throughout this process, there is a deficit required to meet the current operational needs. That said, that does remain a funding source if council were so to choose to do that. Yes.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councilor Vasilakos.
I know I think that there is a funding source there in terms of the reserve, but I think the bigger issue that I look at is we're looking at an operating deficit, but then also a capital deficit in the airport and the cost of the airport, and $20,000 to $40,000. We can keep, again, it's that we can keep delaying, but then that's another $176,000 that, you know, in operating that we're in deficit. Like the longer we delay it, the longer it'll take to make the airport at the very least neutral in terms of tax levy.
Thank you. I saw Councilor Burback. Did you raise your hand? No.
Actually, I didn't, but I do have a question. I'm wondering if we would need to add to the motion that we would take the funding for this from reserves. Is that necessary?
Madam Clerk or the acting director?
Through the chair, I would recommend for clarity purposes that it be added, and we can certainly do that. So if I may, my understanding the motion on the floor is that the report of the fire chief detailing the cost to retain a consultant for the purpose of undertaking a review of the Stratford Airport be received for information, that staff be directed to initiate the study subject to 2022 budget approval, and that the study be funded from the airport reserve. And then I can discuss with our acting director just to clarify the name.
Okay. Is that okay with the mover and seconder? Okay, thank you. Councilor Henderson.
I have two questions. Did Carmen not just say it was in a deficit? The reserve?
Acting director.
Through the chair, my apologies, that wasn't clear. The reserve itself is not in a deficit, but our 10-year forecast is going to struggle.
Oh.
That was what I was referring to, Councillor Henderson. Thank you for the clarification question.
Oh, thank you. Okay, that was kind of confusing. Okay. My question is, I'm not sure if it was in any of the reports that we've seen so far, but you mentioned that you've increased the hangar fees, the gasoline and stuff like that. Have you been able to do an approximate figure of how much that's going to be used? Because it seems you run around 170,000 in the whole, 175 every year. So it seems like it keeps consistent with prices going up. We're matching that so that we're not going higher in debt. But I'm just wondering, with the increases, how much of a difference that's going to make?
So through the chair, these increases in landing fees and types of fuel are on the 2022 budget. We're only speculating of what that's going to do. So we've included those costs already in these figures. So the figure that you see for a deficit for the airport for 2022, that includes those increases. So what is unknown, and you can never speculate, is how many air movements you're going to have. So although we're speculating we're going to make this much off it, actually, if there's COVID-19 loosens up, we get lots of travelers again, people coming in to see the festival when that's open, we could see that deficit number of 172 to 180,000. We could see that actually being lower at the end of the year when we do the tallies. So it, just like any other budget and any service delivery review we do in the city for revenue, it's all done at the subject matter expert level to the best that we can calculate. So it's not best guess, it's our base, all our calculations based on past practice and best practices. And that's all we can do when it comes to fuel sales.
Well, actually, it's not bad. I forgot about the COVID part of it. That, you know, it's 172. That's actually not bad. Was there, and that was probably in the report somewhere, but was there a huge from 2019 to say last year, when we're in the middle of COVID still, was there a huge decrease in people using the airport?
So the airport operations manager is actually on this evening with us, and if we can definitely defer over to Andy if that's, I think the city clerk may need, I don't know if we need a motion for Andy to speak or if he can actually answer that question freely.
Through the chair, the airport manager is on the line and he's able just to unmute himself and answer the question.
Go ahead, Andy, if you can hear us.
Okay, through the chair, 2019, our rough estimate of revenues was about $100,000 more than our 2021 revenues. So pre-COVID, we were busy. So we're holding our own regardless of the COVID and the lack of tourists this year and in 2020 as well.
Thank you, Randy. I had Councillor Seven first.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to I guess, share some of my perspective about the reserves versus not reserves, where the money is coming. It really doesn't, my perspective is that it doesn't really matter. It's still, you know, it's either money that we've paid in the past or it's money that we're going to have to repay to the reserves in the future. So I think for me, it's not really, I guess, although it doesn't affect the tax levy directly this year, it will at some point, or it has already. And so I think for me, that's part of my perspective as to why I don't think we should be spending the money this budget.
Thank you, Councillor Seven. I see Councillor Ingram with the animated hand up. I can't hear you though. Can't hear a thing.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Yeah. Thanks, Daniel.
Sorry, my question was just to be clear with the acting director of corporate services. So we would have a deficit in the 10-year capital forecast, but then we're also running an operating deficit of 172,000. Is that correct? So there's a deficit in both capital and operating expenses?
Through the chair, that language isn't truly the words and the way that we discuss our operating budgets generally. The way I would reframe that is to say that there's $170,000 levy impact. So it's basically not, it's a net impact to the taxpayers after we've considered any applicable revenue versus expenses. So we don't really refer to ourselves operating at a deficit. We refer to what the impact is to the levy, but that's just semantics at this point. With respect to the capital, again, we've sort of highlighted that over the 10-year forecast period for our capital planning purposes and our asset management purposes, we are not currently in a sustainable position to meet all of those required replacements. So further discussions will be coming in the next, I'll say 6 to 160 months to try to figure out how do we best prioritize our projects and our services that are linked to those projects. So the deficit, I'll say there's not an immediate deficit issue within our reserves and our capital planning, but it's something that we'll have to address going forward. Did that help?
I think so, yes, thank you.
I see your worship has his hand up.
Thanks. One of the things I think that came out of last week's meeting with regard to the capital, and I did have a conversation with the CAO, the director, the chief, and of course the airport manager, was with regard to the capital plan. There are items that are in that are not necessary. They're nice to haves and not needs to have. I think at some point we should have that capital list brought back to council. Because some of it, for example, the expansion of the runway apron is only applicable if we get the federal grant for the new hangars, and that's actually a revenue generator, and that's why it's necessary. The same goes with regard to the fuel tanks, and there was some solutions around that. And the runway expansion was one that was not a need to have, it was a nice to have. So it'd be good if we reconciled that list for next Monday's meeting, so that when we're talking about capital deficit and operating expense to the levy, that we're dealing with the most current numbers. So I just asked if we could do that.
Would we like that in a form of a motion, Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, I will look to the acting director of corporate services to see if she would recommend a motion.
Thank you. That recommendation or that suggestion is very valid, and I certainly would like to accommodate that. I don't know if I can do it in a week. However, that said, when we speak about the 10-year forecast and the capital, I'll say long-term things, the mayor does make a very good point in that some of those projects are dependent on grant financing or dependent on our future direction. So they've just been highlighted for items that are on the radar for replacement, and whether they're nice to have or need to have, that's obvious. That will always be a council decision. So certainly, that as we've got the capital plan laid out and as it connects to our asset management plan, we can make those decisions as we move forward to continue or not continue with that replacement. But just to highlight for the budget purposes, if we defer something from a 2022 purchase to a 2023 purchase, it doesn't really make that much of a difference because we're still talking about our capital in a 10-year time frame. That said, the 2022 capital project list is definitely open for discussion, and we can certainly address those when we get there.
Mayor Matheson, a follow-up?
Well, my only concern is if we're going to have the airport looked at, we should make sure that we have the absolute priority items on the capital list that need to be reviewed. And I think it's great that we have a 10-year capital forecast. I think for each one of our departments, some of them would be nice to haves and not always need to haves. And we should probably make sure that when we're making these decisions that we have that. So that's the only thing I would like us to look at. I know Carmen's time constraints for the next week are it, but this is one that as we get further into these projects, we're going to look at the sustainability of what we do. We need to get away from nice to haves and get to need to have.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakis.
So follow up to that, I completely agree. And so this is where it sort of, I link back to having an analysis of the airport with a series of also what ifs, because this is where part of it is that expanded runway is nice to have if we get a grant, but then that also is part of the expansion to make it sustainable. And so I know that it's a difficult to sort of to spend money on a study, but what I think it is that study can tell us what is a nice to have. Like we can review what absolutely has to be done and what's has to be done in the capital in terms of liability and safety and maintenance and making sure that our infrastructure is maintained. But then there's that element of what capital do we spend that then contributes to an expansion and a move to sustainability. And I think we don't have a really good handle on what all that is for the airport, and in terms of also sort of like that economic calculus on the airport and fees and fuel and flights and all of that. So I know it seems like a lot of money to spend, let's say 30,000, the average between 20 and 40. But I think that if what we got back from that was an analysis of the future of the airport over the next 10 years or 15 years to give us a really good handle on what the series of what ifs look like, I think it could be really valuable. And I come back to the airport because we keep having the same conversation.
Thank you. Councillor Ritzma.
Thank you. And I believe my comments and question was similar with regards to the grant application still pending and its impact on future expansion capital costs. So I think if we're going to have a study, that needs to be part of it for sure. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask, hasn't the province have a grant? Don't we have a grant for a service review from the province? Could it not be part of that, or have we already spent dollars on that service review that the province has asked us to do? Isn't this exactly what we're talking about?
Through the chair, we did include the airport for to assess in the service delivery review assessment of fees, hangar expansion, and pros and cons of selling the airport and costing around that. So what you're referring to specifically, Councillor Clifford, that was included in the delivery review of 2021, which is attached to the report. But what Councillor Vasilakos and Mayor Matheson are alluding to is a little bit more in depth than what the service delivery review provided.
Okay, thank you. Does anybody else have any? Oh, I see the acting director's hand went up there.
I apologize, Councillor Sabin. I think he had his hand up as well, but we'll go first quickly. I just wanted to clarify with Mayor Matheson, if the request regarding the capital was specifically about the airport for this conversation, I absolutely can do that in the next week. I think I was getting ahead of myself thinking about our corporate asset structure and our 10-year capital plan. So if that's the case, I don't have any objections.
Thank you.
It was airport specific.
Councillor Sabin.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask if we could separate the recommendation for the receiving of information and then the other piece about the study.
Councillor Ritzma.
Yeah, and I'm assuming this is correct, but if we go down the road of going ahead with a study, will an amount of the study come back to council prior to a decision of going ahead with the study?
Through the chair, yes, that would be the intent. Also, the criteria going into this study, that would be brought before council as well to see if they agree with those criteria for the study and if there's anything else they wish to add or omit before it goes forward. Then once we go through the RFP process, then of course that would definitely be brought back before council.
Thank you.
Councillor Henderson.
We talk about what's a wish and what's a need. I'm wondering if you and Andy Woodham would be able to do that yourselves, like know that, you know ahead of time when the runway needs to be paved, what your type thing. And I mean, sometimes you can put it off by another year, depends on the shape of it, right? But I'm wondering if we couldn't do that ourselves. The climate change lens, see, I'm not sure about that, whether that should just happen when we do all the departments together. Like, well, we're gonna develop a working group and then use the climate change partnership from the county and us, and maybe we'd be able to hire our own coordinator, even if it's later in the year. And I'm just wondering if we need to spend this money for that when we maybe could do it in-house.
Councilor Burback.
Thank you. Yeah, just a thought on the climate lens. The airport wasn't actually included in our data for the GHG emissions. It wasn't anywhere noted. So there's a bit of work to be done for this. I don't think it's something that it would be easy for us staff to pull off because there is no existing data. So there's going to have to be some digging, I would think. So I would highly recommend that would still be a part of this study.
Okay. Chief?
Through the chair. So because we weren't able to ascertain whether the consultants that do these type of studies on airports would be able to do it through a climate change lens, those costs of 20 to 40,000 are for the normal type study in those 9 criteria we listed. Councillor Vasilakos just did highlight that normally they would probably subcontract out that part on the climate change side. I cannot confirm whether that 20 to 40,000 for a normal consultant fee, if that would increase through a subcontracting to bring in a climate change professional to add that into the report. So that 20 to 40,000 is for a normal airport study that council would be looking for. That may still cover the climate change portion, or it may get bumped up. So I just need to be clear on that moving forward. But all that costing through the RFP process would still come back before council. I'm assuming I'm correct in that, and I would have to defer to the acting director of corporate services. That's the normal process.
Typically on an award of that size, it would likely be coming back to council, yes. It depends kind of what it looked like for the size, but given the specific nature of this and the conversation around it, we can absolutely make that commitment that we bring it back regardless.
Thank you. I'm going back to Councillor Seven's comment. We're only looking at one item. Are we not, Madam Clerk? As a result of this report from the chief?
Through the chair, so it's my understanding that Councillor Seven would like the first part of the motion, which is to receive the report to be taken first, and then for the second part to initiate the study and for it to be funded from the reserve to be taken separately.
Is that what you were asking, Councillor Seven? Okay, I see the head nod. Okay, so I do have a mover and seconder. And if there's no other questions or comments, I will call part 1. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Part 2. Do you need or want a mover and seconder on those, or is it a continuous?
Through the chair, because they've already been moved and seconded, you can simply call the question.
Okay, thank you. If there's no other questions, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Thank you, Chief. Item 5, Treasurer's update. Carmen?
Thank you. Through the chair, I'll ask the clerk if she can load my very brief presentation that I'd like to update for council. So this is really just again, a bit of a snapshot to bring us up to where we are today with some of the changes that have been made to your draft document. So next slide. So we're going to continue our conversations tonight of deliberations around the budget. We're going to start with my presentation here. We're going to look at the expansion requests that specifically that were presented in the draft budget and review the divisional budgets where we can obtain any necessary information from staff for council for specific line items, or certainly discuss any specific items. So as this process goes on and up until this process and continuing through the process, we continue to review individual expense and revenue lines, looking for opportunities where it's appropriate to utilize existing reserves, which is the case specifically for one-time kinds of expenses that will decrease the revenues. The 2021 budget year included some temporary decreases to service delivery costs, such as salaries or materials related to activities that were paused during COVID-19. So the 2022 budget has been prepared on the expectation that our operations will resume back to pre-COVID levels. So that's part of the reason why we're feeling a little bit of a pinch at this point. We have tried to help offset some of those costs by utilizing prior year surpluses that have resulted from COVID's lack of, I'll say that the impact to our operations and the inability for us to fully deliver the services. So hopefully those offset each other reasonably closely, and that going into 2023, we won't have a significant change as a result of the impacts from COVID. Next slide. So additional items that I'm bringing to your attention specifically that impact our proposed budget. The first draft included a proposed increase to the community grants line to support the curling event. So we since then have had a subsequent staff report to identify an alternative source of funding. You may recall that we've proposed that funding come from the Special Projects Reserve Fund, previously Hockey Day in Canada type of funding. So that has a result of the budget on the proposed budget of decreasing the proposed levy by 39,600. So that's a positive movement in this case. In the development services draft budget, there's a $10,000 transfer to the reserve for the purposes of official plan work. But since preparing the budget, we've kind of determined, and looking at this also was driven through our look at development charges work that's happening as well. We've determined that there's sufficient funding available in our own reserves and development charges, so this transfer isn't needed for this activity. So again, has a decrease to the proposed levy as well. Also in the development services draft budget, there's a duplication that we recognized relating to recoveries that are recorded for custodial services that are provided to other areas, including tourism, social services, that sort of thing. This particular one, we had a duplication of that recovery revenue, which has a negative impact on the proposed levy or increases it. So we're just correcting that with this change. In the recreation capital budget, there's the addition of the My Main Street Community Activator Grant, which council will see a report. I think the committee saw it the other day, to increase or to add a $90,000 expenditure and also a $90,000 grant. So there's no impact to the net levy, but we are wanting to reflect that in our operational budget. A couple more items in the CAO budget. We've identified that one of the items in the special projects line items, which was identified as a GO Train project, can be funded from the administrative studies reserve, which we have some unallocated funding for, which has an impact of reducing the proposed levy by $30,000. Also in the CAO budget, and the CAO will be able to speak to some of these more specifically when we get to the divisional reviews, but in the CAO budget, we propose removing the transfer to reserve that was currently in there as an expense line, removing it for $15,000, which reduces the proposed levy. So the purpose of removing that is that in this particular budget year, we are looking at utilizing the reserves from the special project reserve. So we're just looking at not duplicating that effort or not just taking it and replacing it and having that all happen in the same year. So it has a positive impact to the bottom line. So the other item that we're sort of adding in again, this is that some of these have no levy impact, but we're trying to best reflect our proposed operations and our proposed work plan. There's an addition of revenue and an expense. I didn't put the amount in there, but it's $40,000 relating to leadership training. So we've added an expense of $40,000 and added a transfer from reserves to offset that. So there's no levy impact of that, and that's a $40,000 total. So one of the other things I did want to bring up, and we talked a little bit about this, is an additional strategy that was discussed where we talk about gapping, or we talk about staggering the impact of new initiatives over multiple years or subsequent years. So some of the initiatives that we have proposed and some of the, I'll say, like the expansion requests will take a bit of time to get going, not necessarily a half a year, but we're expecting it'll be a few months before we can get them going, at least to their fullest capacity. So we are suggesting that's maybe a situation where we could suggest that we spread the costs of those expansion requests over the 2022 and 2023 budgets. So if we did that, that has an impact of reducing the 2022 levy by additional $200,000.
but it does impact the 2023 levy beyond this once those projects are implemented and those additional expansions are dealt with. So based on all of that update, we're looking at a total increase of the 212, including the expansion requests. And if I could go to the next slide for a second, I think I've got a typo there. So the total tax levy that we started with was $63 million. We've got a proposed increase of 4.7 million. The expansion requests or the adjustments that we're proposing of 211. So our total increase of 4.9 million, which means our total taxation dollars raised would be 68 million. So again, I wanted to try to frame this in numbers and figures that we've discussed so far. So if I can go to the next slide, just to kind of summarize where we're sitting. If we go forward with our expansion requests at the 50% mark and all of the other changes that I proposed, we're sitting at a 7.8% increase over the prior year. And after blending everything together with our growth and looking at the combined impact to the taxpayer, it works out to about 5.2% increase. So again, I realize and recognize that we're going to be getting into this discussion a little further, but I wanted you to have a better sense of where we're sitting right now. So that 8.6 number that we started with several meetings ago is now down to 7.8, and the impact to the taxpayer being about 5.2% on an average residential home. Okay. So I think that's so next steps. Again, I'd like a motion to adopt the proposed changes that have been presented in this presentation, which is essentially a decrease of 94,600. If we ignore the expansion requests, or an increase of 116.97 if we include the expansion requests at the 50% mark. So, and then we'll continue on with our deliberations and look at our final approval bylaw as the next step. So I'm happy to answer any questions about this. And again, we'll be able to have an opportunity to talk about some of these when we get into the overview of the operations budget, but I just wanted to start off with that. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Carmen. Councillor Clifford.
Yes, I was going to ask Carmen, are we talking about the expansion hiring one person or whatever? I don't have it right in front of me. Having part of the hires in 2022 and part of the hires in 2023. Is that what I understand you said?
Great question. Thank you through the chair. That wasn't really exactly what I was intending with that discussion. It was more that we would proceed or potentially proceed with all of the expansion requests. It's just that by the time they were implemented or that they got sort of up and going, that it might not have as significant of an impact in the 2022 budget.
Thank you. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Can I just clarify what I guess I'm just about what the changes that you're looking for to be authorized, if they include the expansion or they don't. I'm just wondering, since we're talking about the expansion request next, I'm just not sure how that would affect that. If you could just clear that up for me, please.
For sure, through the chair. So this might make sense for us to defer this motion until after we've had that conversation, but I just wanted to capture that that's what we sort of need to go forward with. That we could pass a motion now that excluded the dealing with the expansion requests and then come back to that after we talk about the expansion requests. That's fine too. I'm not sure the proper process.
Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, if I could receive a motion now that staff be authorized to make proposed changes to the budget as noted in the treasurer's presentation in the amount of, I believe it was $94,600, which did not include the expansion request. We can accept those changes now and then proceed forward with discussing the expansion request and then move into operating.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone wish to make that motion? Councillor Ritzman, Councillor Ingram. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Could I just ask the director as well, or the acting director, what is the proposed levy then if it was 5.2 with the expansion request? What is it without the expansion request? Do you have that number?
Yep, I can get that for you. It's honestly a fairly, very nominal change. Just give me 1 second though, and I can tell you. So including, if we include the expansion requests, then the proposed tax, that you're asking about the tax rate change, is that correct, Councillor Seven? Yeah. So we're predicting that the combined rate will be 5.16 with the expansion requests included, And let me just remove them for a quick second and I can give you a new number here. A combined tax rate increase of 4.87 if we exclude them altogether.
Thank you. And then if I, and that would be, as Councillor Clifford mentioned, that would be the 5.16 would be with the sort of expected delay in implementing some of the expansions.
Correct, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Vasilakos.
I had a question around that, 5.16. It includes an increase in our debt servicing because of a couple of large projects. Is that correct? So, so if you, just because I'm trying to sort of wrap my head around what is sort of like operational increases because of our union contracts and regular sort of cost of living, increases to what it's costing us, but then also the impact on the levy this year of particularly Queen Street, which was a really big project that had been batted around for some time.
For sure. If I may, through the chair. So right now, when we're sitting at the 7.9% change, 3% of that relates to the change in our debt repayment. So that's the significant component. Another significant component is the changes to our wages and benefits. So part of that, I want to break that down a little bit for council. Part of that will be the result of the salary review that was done in 2020 that we've kind of staggered the implementation of. So it's the financial result of a prior decision that is going to, if it's kind of the effect of gapping, if you will, for that particular thing. It's also, though, including, as I referenced earlier, trying to bring some of our more so seasonal workers, but some of our service levels back up to pre-COVID levels. So we're basically, we had given the decrease in 2021 for not hiring seasonal people because of COVID. So now we're looking at bringing it back and having an increase as a result of that. So it's a combination of things. In addition to that, there's also any I'll say cost of living changes as a result of union contracts or other types of things. So it's really only, I'm going to say it's not a result of any kind of expansion on terms of wages. It's just the effects of all of those other factors on that.
Thank you. Any other questions on this item? I will call the question. All those in favor? That carries. So I'm going to ask council, is there anything else on the expansion requests, Your Worship?
Didn't mean to do that. On the expansion request, I had one question with regard to hiring both a manager of inclusion, equity, and initiatives, and also a coordinator of equity, inclusion, and accessibility issues. Is the manager's position not one that could come in and get a lot of the foundational work done, and the coordinator could be looked at to start in 2023? I just wonder, adding two positions in that area at one time, whether or not it's coordinated and such. So I just asked the CAO that as for her input, or that of the Director of Human Resources.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, I can start, and then if the Director of HR would like to add to it, certainly Council can do that. However, it would be my recommendation to Council at this time that it is the coordinator position, including the accessibility initiatives, that is the more critical position at this time. The implications for not hiring that position right away is we would not be meeting our legislative compliance requirements with AODA. So we would prefer, as I said, if Council wishes to split those up, that look at the coordinator position to give us that assistance with the accessibility compliance that we need to do. There are implications to our website. There are documents on there that are still not fully compliant with being accessible. And so we do need resources to assist us in keep getting us into that position. With respect to the manager position, I think that my recommendation is, again, if we can, if you want to stagger them, that one could be the second position while we are currently working on our diversity, equity, and inclusive project plan. Let us finish that this spring, and then we could bring on the manager position after that. And Mr. Chair, if there's anything further that our Director of HR would like to add at this time.
Through your worship, the position for the management position, once the project is once we've begun the project and the recommendations come back to us, that's when we need somebody to guide the recommendations. So it's later in this year. Right now, we're just collecting data, getting a handle on our culture, having our policies and procedures reviewed, and then recommendations to come back, and then we'll begin the plan. But I don't foresee that happening till, let's say, August, September of this year. So we, in pursuit of somebody, and again, I'm going to explain to council that it's very difficult to find people in this position, and especially kind of putting it out there. There are a lot of organizations that also have posted just a myriad of postings that are out there. So it takes a longer period of time to hire somebody like this as well. So, I don't suspect that we would see somebody come into the position until later in the fall or even the beginning of the following year. So we have that ability. The CAO is correct. The greater problem right now is filling that accessibility spot so that we can have boots on the ground that are actually working on the things that need to be worked on based on compliance, and then hiring somebody to guide the process of IDEI for the organization. But that can happen after we complete this project and we have our recommendations and we start to build our plan.
Thank you, Ed. Mayor Matheson?
Well, then based on that, and I appreciate the CAO and the Director of Human Resources providing the background, it's important we meet our legislative requirements. And I think hiring the coordinator with regard to equity, inclusion, and accessibility initiatives move forward. Based on what they've said, I would ask that we defer the manager position to the 2023 budget, or at least we gap till the fourth quarter of 2022 to allow them to do a recruiting and have some of the initial work done. So I'll wait for council to maybe weigh in on that, and then we can maybe table a full motion with the seconder.
I saw Councillor Henderson's hand first.
Hi, I was just wondering, like, some of these positions that we're asking for, do we see it? Like, I know with accessibility, that's a long term, and making sure human rights and Indigenous is all up to speed and works well. Like, is that a position that maybe could be one together, that they could do accessibility issues and human rights issues, Indigenous issues? And another part of me is wondering, some of the positions when we're hiring them for, I remember at work what we used to do is we actually would contract the job out because it would say only, I don't know, for a year or 18 months or something. And I'm wondering if that's a possibility, because then when you contract it out, it all depends on how you contract it out. You save on benefits and different things too, right? Like, do we feel these positions need to be full-time? That's just what I'm asking. Like, I know with accessibility, like, we shared with Julie Opia before from the County of Perth, and she spent a lot of time with us. We had lots of little subcommittee meetings, and we spent a lot of time going over the site plan reviews, and she made up templates and different things. I mean, once all that kind of stuff's done, and then you're just working on your site plan reviews, it's less time than the first year when you're getting everything organized, right? I guess what I'm wondering is, if once everything is up to date, will we need them full-time?
Through your worship, I can speak to that. With respect to the accessibility coordinator, that will be an ongoing position that is a full-time position, because you will always have to maintain that compliance even beyond 2025. That is a lot of work. So the actual portfolio for both is too much for one person. Driving this diversity initiative and inclusion initiative is also a full-time job, because as I mentioned, organizations kind of failed on this count when, you know, they've made other attempts in history, treating it very much like a contract position. This is something that has been recognized that needs to be part of your DNA as an organization, and you need to have that advocacy to move the organization forward, keep it going for it to be successful. So that's why most organizations have made it a permanent position with somebody driving it at the helm, and it's never under. You'll notice now that it's rarely under human resources. It's a totally different, you know, different department, because it needs to have that kind of focus. And human resources is become a client of that department as well, because you know, we also require that subject matter expertise. So you're seeing a shift or a very different landscape with respect to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And as you've seen over this pandemic, a lot of the issues that have to be dealt with, that this organization has to deal with and has to have that kind of expertise ongoing. It's not, let's just fix a few things. It's going to continue to evolve, and we're going to have to continue to address these things for our community and for the corporation as well. So you have to have a dedicated resource, and just filling it with a consultant for 2 years will not do that, and is not the commitment that's needed.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Clifford, sorry.
I actually believe Councillor Ingram is ahead of me.
Oh,
Can I finish my
Right.
follow-up, Dave?
Do you have a follow-up, Bonnie?
Yes, I do. Thanks. So part of the budget, we were looking at making some of the city clerks full-time instead of part-time. I think it was 2. And I know we had that report a couple of years ago about how to, you know, save money in the, and it looked at whether we had enough staff or not enough or whatever. Some areas we needed some and some we didn't. I'm assuming we've looked to see if there's anybody on staff, especially since we're going to get, you know, if we get the clerks full time, would there be somebody that's now sort of opened up to maybe take that position on? I know you have to have special trainings for accessibility to learn all that, and then I'm not sure what all the qualifications to work on the Indigenous human rights stuff is, but and I understand it's, you know, it's been something that obviously has come to light with all the issues that are going on right now in our country, that it's very important that we have somebody looking at that. And I was at the Roma conference the last 2 days, and they talked about how important it is that when you're discussing things at council, that you do include somebody from the Indigenous community and have them part of the discussion, or if you're having subcommittees or anything like that, it's very important that they're part of that. And we had an excellent speaker talk about how if we, you know, reach out and work with them, that's how it starts, just by reaching out, working together.
Through your worship, I can kind of answer that question as well. When I talked about a large platform and portfolio, that's exactly what it is, Councillor Henderson. You have to have somebody dedicated to build those relationships, foster those relationships, maintain them on behalf of the city, so that we can leverage that kind of expertise, you know, in those communities. Right now, when you look at the composition of this city, and I'll be very candid, it isn't diverse. You know what I mean? We have a very small number of diverse people that we're aware of, you know what I mean? But you know what I mean? It isn't diverse. And yet your city will change There is a need to have somebody that is diverse, you know what I mean, do this kind of work because they have that subject matter expertise. We can't just take somebody and plant them in there that doesn't have that kind of background. You know, it does require the background, it does require the expertise to do it right so that we don't create situations where we harm people. You know, it's something that we have to take into consideration. And yes, I don't believe, based on what I know of this organization, we have anybody with that type of expertise at this point in time. So it's very important if we're going to do this right. And you know what I mean, make sure that we're creating something that's sustainable for future and will help this organization navigate this as we change and we evolve as a group of people.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. For the acting director of corporate services, is there a hierarchy or a priority list for all of the expansion requests in terms of priorities and gapping?
No, I think that the priorities were to be, I guess, we've identified them as priorities at the staff level, but if council wants there to be a ranking system or whatever, we could work through that, I suppose. It's not, you know, we haven't sort of established, I think the CAO alluded to the fact that, you know, if need be, that we would be wanting to implement the coordinator prior to the manager type of a structure in that effect. I would like to just kind of comment on that briefly, though, that, you know, if the manager position, for example, isn't required until the end of the fiscal year of 2022, I still think it's important to include something, and the mayor alluded to, you know, even a quarter, you know, a 1 quarter impact or whatever, because that does speak to the commitment to the initiative, not just the financial dollars. So it allows staff to move forward with those initiatives at the time, recognizing that there may be a financial implication in a subsequent year. So that's just my 2 cents on that. I'm not sure if I totally answered your question about hierarchy, but these expansion requests do come from various departments within. So I think it would be the departments could speak to the necessity or the priority within their group. But as a whole, they're not ranked, no.
Okay, thank you. And just on the just a comment on the manager position, I think it is important to keep it at least partly in this year's budget and go through the hiring process, because if you have to go through the hiring process 2, maybe 3 times because you're not getting that quality candidate that you're really looking for, you definitely want to start it this year so that it is up and running for sure by next year.
Councillor Burback.
Thank you. Yeah, actually, I did have the same suggestion that Mayor Matheson had. I was going to bring up as well. So I like the idea of putting that manager position into the 4th quarter and adding it to this year's budget. That makes a lot of sense to me. I do think that the work of equity, inclusion, accessibility, it's all really important. And I do think we need to be moving forward with that sooner than later. I also was at the Roma conference the last couple of days, and I want to speak a little bit to the request for a climate change coordinator, which I am planning to put in a motion that we add that as an expansion request. At the Roma conference, they talked about the importance of mainstreaming climate change into all of our policies and our planning documents. And applying a climate lens as well to update them. So I do think that the manager of engineering, or the director of infrastructure, sorry, I think the plan to create a working group is really important. And I think that's a great way to move forward. I think it's necessary and really important to make the connections between departments for existing staff to start on the climate file. But I do think that there are a couple of big projects that are coming forward in the next year that we really will need extra hands on deck for. One of them is the OP, the official plan update. And the other is the creation of green development standards. And green development standards especially, there's a matter of reaching out to stakeholders, developers, industry, commercial, like there's a big job there to update the official plan, to create green development standards. So I just can't see how existing staff might be able to tackle all of that. I did talk to Director Crinklaw about what that might look like as far as an expansion request. And his recommendation was that the cost would be similar to the coordinator position, the coordinator of equity, inclusion, and accessibility. So I would like to make a motion that we would add that expansion request, and with the possibility of, again, maybe doing a staggering so that it's we're maybe hiring somebody partway through the year once the working group gets going and can assign some duties to that person. So I would like to make the motion that we would add a climate change coordinator position to this year's budget.
Through the chair, you are muted.
Yeah. Seconder, Councillor Ritzma. Any discussion on that? Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Do we have any, we don't have any sort of information about cost for this? And I'm also just wondering how this would be different than the shared position that we have already approved.
Thank you. Does the director have a number on this, or what? Taylor?
Yeah, through the chair, in the discussion with Councillor Burbeck, to get an idea of what the anticipated cost would be, I use the coordinator position as an example because of the same title, and most positions in the city with the same title are fairly close in cost. So that would be a good starting point. However, we have to do some review internally to figure out exactly what that would be.
Thank you. Acting Director.
Just, I can briefly comment on that too. So we've got it for the accessibility coordinator position. It's just under 75,000, and that's including annually, including the benefit costs. So if we made that the same, it would be about just under 75,000. And I can I've been working as we speak about figuring out the impact. So if we were to do what's been discussed so far, and stagger like both positions, both the climate change coordinator, as well as looking at the manager of inclusion being 25% instead of 50. It does make a difference to the bottom line. I think the previous presentation had it set that 50% across the board was a $211,000 ad. It works out to $249,000 ad if we include the climate change coordinator as part of that. So hopefully that helps to position it for you.
And to the second part of Councillor Seven's question was, do we not hire the part-time one or the shared one we're going to go with the county and St. Mary's?
Through the chair, I would defer that to the Director of Infrastructure. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, through the chair. At this point, the shared position is a fraction of a coordinator position, so it is shared with many other municipalities throughout the county. Our contributions for 2022 equivalent, we budgeted $20,000. So I would anticipate working with the coordinator, we would receive approximately that amount of service back to move that initiative. Whereas if we were to have our own internal position, that contribution would be 100% dedicated to Stratford.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I when we had the report before, it seemed to me that staff were telling us that it's going to take time to get with these working groups to get things up and going. Like, we don't want to hire someone before we're prepared to hire. So I'd like to ask staff's opinion. How long does it take to get the working groups up and actually to have a position? Like, that we can tell the person what their job is. I'd like to hear from staff about, because I think that's what you talked about when you reported on it like a week ago.
Thank you, Councillor Clifford, through the chair. That is the intent of our initial steps, is establish a working group to figure out what those resource requirements would be. I anticipate there will be resource requirements needed at the end of it. The working group would just help define what those services or what those tasks would be associated with that position. Since the working group is just initiated, it would be several months at least before we have any kind of inclination of what kind of resources we would be looking at going forward. And depending on council's decision, that would be prioritized accordingly.
So again, going back to Councillor Seven's question, are we better off moving ahead with our part-time shared, sorry, not part-time, our shared person for 2022 and be prepared in 2023 once the working groups are done and the studies have been done and we have a much better grasp on what we're going to need in the future. Not add that amount to the 2022 budget, target to 2020. No, it's just an idea. I had Councillor Henderson first.
I had a question for the community services. In the budget, they're wanting to have a supervisor on the weekends. To my knowledge, we've never done this before, and I'm not aware.
Sorry, Bonnie, I apologize for interrupting, but if we could deal with this one first, and then when we're done with this one, we'll move on to the next.
I was just saying, like, if we don't need this position, that might influence the decision on this.
Okay,
That makes sense?
well, that's not, your worship.
If I could, I started off talking about whether or not we're going to do a manager position. We should probably deal with it. Then we should go to the climate coordinator position. Then we should go through the next one and deal with them individually. Right now, I think we're mixing things up, and I'd like us to be structured in how we approach this.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that being said, we'll go back to Mayor Matheson's original suggestion on the coordinator for next year. So you were going to make a motion on that, your worship?
I'll make a motion that the manager of inclusion equity initiatives be budgeted for a quarter of the year, and that the coordinator of equity, inclusion, accessibility initiatives be approved.
Thank you. Seconder for that, Councillor Burback. Any questions? Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Can I just ask, I guess for both positions, so is there, I mean, I would like to see some type of, I don't know, like a 1-year term, even for both positions, and only for the fact that they're full-time positions and they are quite expensive. And if we are not, and just to review it in a year's time, not for the existence of the position, but for, I think, for the individual that is performing in that position. That may be already something that would be done, but I guess I'm not comfortable hiring somebody permanent full-time if we don't sort of have any experience with that position. I just want us to make sure we're kind of getting what we are hoping to obtain as a result. So I don't know if maybe something like that exists already for a position like this, but if maybe the acting director of human resources could comment, or whoever best appropriate.
Okay, I'll start with through your worship, in response to Councillor Seven, I'll start with the manager. If you post a job for 1 year, and this job in particular, it's very difficult to find these people right now and this expertise, because it's very competitive across Canada, actually beyond Canada. Everybody is hiring this, and there are very few people out there with this expertise. So I don't know what you would draw in at that point when it's only a 1-year contract. So you have, and also I think you send a signal too as well that we're not treating it with the reverence we should be, you know, in terms of the importance of this to the organization. So that's what I would probably counsel you against, because it does create that stigma around this, that it isn't, we're not placing the importance we need to on that particular position. And I'm worried about what you would actually get in terms of recruitment with that significance. With the accessibility coordinator, this is a need that's not going to go away. And right now we don't have a dedicated resource to this. So this work is being done piecemeal. We're not entirely compliant. There's work to be done. And we have up to 2025 to get everything in place and hopefully be compliant and continue to be compliant in this area. So this is not a position that's going to go away. So also a need to make sure that you post it permanently so you get the best caliber of candidates that can come in and help us with this initiative.
Thank you, Ann. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I believe it is important to hire the coordinator. I got a couple questions. Is there an office space if she's not going to be, or it's like in HR, what like who would be in charge of that person in the meantime? And my other question is, obviously we're into February just about. Are we believing that we'd have someone hired by April? And if we are, there is an opportunity for some gapping in there.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
I think it's really important to actually make it a permanent position. I don't think you can actually accomplish institutional and system-wide change in the corporation without a full-time position. It's going to take much more than a year. You won't know in a year. The other part of it is, for most management positions, we do have a probationary period. So on one hand, we're creating the position, which is important to the corporation to fulfill something that we have prioritized. The other part of it is in our hiring process. I'm assuming, like most jobs, the probationary period, that allows us to understand whether the person that we've hired actually is a good fit for the job description that is put out there. And if that's the case, then that takes care of, I think, Councillor Seven's concerns around the hiring as opposed to the position.
Thank you. Councillor Henderson.
I just wanted to say that staff has been excellent at trying to help the accessibility committee. And I know it's taking extra time away from the jobs that they're trying to get done. And a couple times our accessibility committee actually finishes the report and then sends it off to staff. And we have really noticed a huge difference since we've lost the shared services with the County of Perth. I don't know, it's kind of depressing in a way, like, as we got so much stuff we want to get done, and there's really nobody there that is able to give us that time. And it's very important that, so I'm sure all the rest of the departments that need help with that are also struggling.
Thank you. Councillor Burback.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to go back to Councillor Clifford's question about the gapping. Is this something that we could do as, say, a 75%, because we know that they're not going to be hired within the first 3 months of this year? Does that make sense to adjust the budget that way?
Acting Director of Finance. Do you have a response for that?
Through you, the chair. Absolutely. We can stagger or gap all of these positions however percentage wise we want to. I think just from a planning perspective, it becomes a little more difficult for tracking as if we start to manage them. You know, I jumped on it a little bit with the manager position that the mayor was referring to, but you know, I would sort of suggest that, you know, 50% is probably a good average in the big scheme of things for all of the positions. Some might get hired sooner than others and some later, but that, you know, I think that would be my suggestion, is that, you know, we go with a 50% estimate. We might be, like I said, slightly over or slightly under, depending on which position we're talking about, but
it at least gives the direction and provides the direction to staff to proceed with the actual like what we're trying to accomplish here, so that we're not stuck without funding for something that we're not, and then, you know, the decision itself becomes, was the direction to move forward actually approved or not, because there's no funding associated with it or not. So this allows us to have both a bit of funding and the direction to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate, I support the permanency of the position, but I was just wondering, and maybe the acting director could give a little more detail as the probationary period. Is that how long is that, and does that allow us, if the performance isn't what we're hoping for, that it would be, you know, at that point it's still kind of, I guess, more practical to remove them and find somebody else, so to speak?
So with recruitment and with hiring, there's always a probationary period that we permit. It's 90 days. ESA, you know, probation is 90 days. The corporation can extend that, you know what I mean, if things aren't going well, but we always apply that in all throughout any management level position or any position hired. We do that kind of review at 90 days to ensure that the candidate is meeting the mark. So it would be treated very much like every other job that we post. And there is opportunity to address any concern if we do end up with someone that, you know, isn't fulfilling the role in the manner that we wish. So yes, that leaves us the ability to do that. Every job is treated the same.
Thank you, Anne. I see.
If I could just follow up.
Sure.
Okay. So is it permissible then to extend the probationary period to, say, a 6-month period, or is that like under the regulations and things?
If you want to establish that, you can in the offer letter that this would require a 6-month probationary period. Statutory probation is 90 days, but you can do that as an employer. My worry with that is we would have to be applying that same principle to every job to make it fair and equitable, the process. So we wouldn't do something different to this job that we don't do for others, because it would be seen as a differential treatment. We would follow the normal course that we follow with respect to probation.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Councillor Vasilakos.
So I want to go back to just real quick, as the director said, the overall plan was to target for about a roughly 50% gapping in these overall. And I think while I do agree with the mayor that in the positions of the two CAO positions, the positions that report to the CAO, there is the opportunity to actually clarify what that gapping may look like because of how the plan will actually roll out. So that makes sense. But I want to sort of not get caught in the weeds as council, trying to finesse what month somebody will be hired or when or how we can get, because I think what we've found is that some positions take 2 or 3 rounds to fill, and others will fill immediately. Another position we thought we needed, but we could, you know, maybe the custodians, maybe COVID lasts a little longer and those get, so I don't want to, for council, like I think the broad principles that will land somewhere around 50%. Gapping on these positions is a good way to look at it, as opposed to trying to go through each one and finesse what that gap may look like and what percent that may land on. That's just me, because I don't think that's our job, actually.
Councillor Burback.
Thank you. I agree with that. Just a question about when we make motions, then are we going to assume that if we put the position forward that it's going to be at 50% gapping? Is that the way we're going to proceed, or do we need to make it a part of the motion?
I will ask the person that made the motion. Your worship.
I'm quite happy to try to do a blanket if it's easier for Carmen to calculate. But there are some logistics. We're talking about a salary of or an annualized salary of 154 salary and benefits. A quarter of that is significantly more than a quarter of a part-time or full-time custodian at 54,000. And I think we're trying to make sure that we save money and cut. And I think I'd rather be a little bit more definitive in our pieces, and it gives clear understanding to staff. But I'll defer to the CAO and the acting director on what's easiest for them for calculation and operational purposes.
Thank you.
If I may, through the chair. So again, if we want to do this for each individual position, that's totally fine. We can implement that and we could do it that way. I think the bigger discussion is that if we don't include any type of financial impact, then we're also left a little cloudy on the direction of the whole decision. So I think that's where I just want to be clear that, you know, if we're proceeding with the decision to hire, the timing stuff honestly will pretty much work itself out regardless of whether we use 75% or 25%, and you know it'll be fine by the end of the year, because we'll have, you know, different types of things that will impact salaries and wages throughout the year that we may not be able to anticipate at this time. So I'm good with breaking them down. If we want to treat them individually and then discuss the timing and the gapping piece, that's fine, but it is a little it may not result in the same kind of impact that it does for this one position that the mayor has identified. The others will be much more minor.
Thank you. Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. So I agree with the acting director of corporate services, and I think you know we've set the target. We've talked about these expansion requests. Staff then have to go ahead and hire in accordance with the mathematical calculation that's going to get us to the expansion target. So I think we probably need to leave that in staff's hands to do outside of the manager position, and then perhaps the inclusion of the climate change coordinator. I think we then have to leave it in staff's hand to make sure that whatever position they're hiring for and however they're going to gap it is going to meet that target for the expansion requests.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ingram. That was fantastic. I'm going to call the question of Mayor Matheson's motion. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. To the next one, Councillor Burback, would you like to make a motion if one hasn't been made already on the climate coordinator?
Yes, I would like to make the motion that we would add that position to the expansion request, and it would also be gapped, obviously.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Henderson. Any questions, Councillor Clifford?
Yeah, I believe staff had a plan and have a plan. And we do have a shared coordinator. I think it's important to have a climate coordinator, but I don't believe we have to have one till 2023. So I oppose the motion on the floor. Councillor Burback.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that the shared climate coordinator is basically working on a completely different project. They're working on an overarching project for the entire county. So that person, it will not be doing any specific to Stratford work outside of that overarching plan. So the position that I think we're recommending here that the director was talking about would be Stratford specific and be part of our staff moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor Burback. Councillor Vasilakos.
And this is an extension of what Councillor Burback just said, but if you'll recall from our conversation when we actually made the commitment to the climate change plan, there are two different things. There's the community plan for how individuals and businesses and everyone will be involved in a climate target, and that's what the shared coordinator is doing, the one that we've shared with the other municipalities. I think what we also have is corporate initiatives. So how the city of Stratford as a corporation is going to actually address the climate targets. And that's what is sort of the important piece of coordinating within the corporation. And that position, that other position that we're paying for isn't really involved in that piece of it. That we can't call them in and have them work on a corporate strategy and work within the corporation in that way. That's not their job.
Thank you, Kathy. I had, I think I saw Councillor Sevens hand go up there.
Yeah, thank you. So first, I had two things. I just had a question about process, how this would work. So if this is approved, and I assume that by putting this on an expansion request, that means putting it as an expansion. I'm just wondering what the process is. Is that if this is approved, then staff go ahead and hire this position, or are there steps in between that?
I think the acting director of human services has already gone over that, but if she's available, maybe you can go over it again.
I guess if I can clarify if there's more steps for council, or if this is the only step in that.
Oh, thank you. Is that something you can answer, Anne? No? Or maybe it's Joan, or
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly I can start, and then perhaps the director can fine tune it. But if the direction is given, we would take the usual steps and follow our usual hiring processes. There will need to be a job description prepared for this document, or for this position. And then once we have all of those issues settled, then we will be able to post the position. And as I said, I'm not sure if there's more detail that you're seeking at this point, and that the director can respond to.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And so just to follow up, I guess. Pardon me?
Go ahead, Cody.
Okay, sorry. So just to follow up. Sorry, is it okay with this? Yeah.
Are you hearing something like?
Yeah, sorry, I thought you were trying to jump in there.
Oh, no, go. Carry on.
Sorry. So I guess I'm just ultimately, I understand the position. I'm not comfortable though with this is almost brought up as new business, and although there's been discussion with Councilor Burback, and I don't have that information, and I don't have more information as far as an exact amount. I don't have information as to what their actual purpose, and what they would be hired to do exactly. I know we have sort of discussion about it, but we don't have exactly what their mandate would be and what they would be doing. And so, I'm not necessarily opposed. I just would prefer if that would be something we could have in front of us, or I could have in front of me before deciding on this. So if we're going to go ahead and pass this now, I'm opposed, but I think if we could defer this to even next week or sometime before we go ahead and approve it, I would be comfortable with that. So.
This is something I can easily do. I can certainly draft the job descriptions for both of these jobs. I actually have a draft, so it's something that I can just spruce up and pass along if that would be helpful.
Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, if I could just add some clarification. So again, all of these motions are just being made at committee. It's my understanding we are still going to have a Finance and Labor Relations Committee budget meeting next week. At that time, I believe a further update would be provided on any amendments that have been made. And then any recommendation does need to come back to council for a final approval. So again, this is just direction. Staff would not be going out and hiring these positions now. We would still need to wait for budget approval from council.
Excellent, thank you. Councilor Ritzma.
Thank you, through the chair. It's a comment, and I know additional information will come forward, and as the clerk said, there will be due process, but certainly climate change is a significant issue, and we need to support it with dollars and human resources. I really think that's important for us to acknowledge that and plan for those costs. I really do think that's important for us to do.
Sorry, I was on mute again. Councilor Basilakos.
So if I may, we did have the Director of Infrastructure give us an overview of the plan forward for the climate action plan last week. And tonight also, they've put together a working group. They're, doing a gap analysis, looking at seeing where they need support and coming up with a strategy. And he did just say that it would be some time before they would be at the position of hiring this position, although it would be very useful to have at some point this year. So we already know that there's a planning gap. They're not going to run out tomorrow and hire someone because they're working on what that may look like and what their needs may be. And so, and the other part of that is that working group, and the director did say that he would be reporting to Infrastructure, Transportation and Safety Subcommittee on the progress of that group. And my assumption would be that he could keep council apprised of what the status is of the work that they're doing, and also the status of what that coordinator position may look like and where it could be coming into the overall plan. So I don't have a problem in approving that position, knowing that we have a process in place to get to bringing it in-house.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question. We've heard enough on this topic, I would think. Councillor Seven, you've spoken on this topic 3 times. But if you feel
respectfully, Chair, I think a full-time position with, and I think what we're talking about, and I know we have had discussion, we've had information verbally presented, but what I'm looking for with the full-time position that comes along with additional, long-term benefits, pension and everything, I would be looking for some type of amendment that perhaps if this were approved, that before final adoption, we had a description of some kind of the role presented to us. That would be what I would be perhaps a friendly amendment if that would work. But.
Your Worship.
Can you clarify when this position is set to start? Is it a 50% cap? Is it? I want to be sure where we landed on that.
As part of my motion, I mentioned a 50% gap. So, yeah. And I do think that staff said that they would come back, like this will come back to us to vote on. And in the meantime, that we can get information from Human Resources about more of a job description. I thought that was how we were going to move forward.
Staff has said it 3 times. Anything else? All those in favor of the motion? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Is there anything else in the expansions that anyone would like to have a look at? Councillor Henderson.
Yes, I was wondering under the transit why there was I felt there was a need for a supervisor on the weekends. To my knowledge, that isn't anything we've ever done in the past. And I just wonder, is there a lot of problems on the weekend? And would they just be working like the daytime hours, or what's all involved? And I'm just wondering if that's something that could be put off, or I haven't heard of any issues when I was on the transit committee, and I'm just wondering what brought this about.
Mr. St. Louis.
So if I can give a little bit of history through the chair, it's at one point transit had a supervisor of parallel transit and a supervisor of transit and a manager. We evolved differently over the years, and the things that have affected us are the legislation that turned parallel transit into matching the similar hours to transit or exact hours, and we added Sunday service. And now we are on demand for Saturday and Sunday. And I believe that the reason for a weekend supervisor is it's a service enhancement to our customers that need more on-the-spot decision making and in speaking with their manager and supervisor, currently they are receiving a lot of phone calls off hours to solve issues.
Sorry, thank you, Director. Thank you, Bonnie. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I believe it would be helpful to have someone, but with the tax increase we're talking at almost 8%, I think it is something that we could put off for 1 year. I mean, we add things on here as if the taxpayer, he doesn't matter, so, or he or she. So I just think we have to find some places where it's not going to hurt our services. Obviously, like the director said, it would help, but I think there is a place here where that particular transit supervisor for the weekend, it could be taken off, quite frankly.
You're making a motion to that effect?
I am.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Clifford. Do I have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Seven. Anyone like to speak to that motion? No questions. I'll call the question. Oh, Councillor Seven.
Right, I guess I'll just, I support the motion. I think, it was a few years ago or so that we hired a supervisor for transit, and the transit on demand service, I mean, the hope behind that was to sort of reduce costs, and I feel like, maybe we could have a discussion, or staff could have discussions about sort of rotating, instead of working 6 or 7 days, they could have days off during the week instead of on the weekend at times, or however that would work. But I think there may be other ways to find a solution for this position. But
okay, thank you. Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Chair. I will speak against this motion. I believe that we've spoken about this issue a number of times, about asking our existing staff to do their roles and then some. And I believe that, and I don't want to overstep my no, or what the director's already shared, but I believe it's fair to say that our manager of transportation here has a very busy role, and to continue to expect our staff to go above and beyond, we could potentially be looking at people who just say, I need support, and if I don't get it, they get burnt out. And that really concerns me. We need to support our staff, and this is of great importance to me, and so that's why I will speak against it.
Thank you. Councillor Ritzman.
A question. Are we, and I am believing it's going to our Director of Community Services, are we currently paying overtime for this job? That you're saying that people are getting calls, and I'm just wondering whether there's a cost being incurred right now.
Through the chair, these positions are management or administrative positions and do not incur overtime. They are they get 5 days in lieu of overtime as part of their agreement, employment agreement.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ritzman.
But just a follow-up to Councillor Beattie's point, there is obviously a cost involved with regards to the stress on the individual receiving those calls. So thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? I'll call the question. All those the CAO.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. If I may just speak to this, all of the expansion requests that are before you were scrutinized by CLT. And so with this position that is being requested, I would also draw to council's attention that transit is a 7-day service that is heavily customer service based. And this position, having someone, a supervisor position available on the weekends, will greatly assist us in addressing any customer service and operational issues on the weekends. And as I said, to continue to expect manager and a supervisor who normally work 5 days a week to be on call constantly is a serious health and safety concern for me.
Okay, thank you. I will. Councillor Henderson.
So since they're just gonna work the weekend, are they gonna work the whole, like, you know, from what, 6 in the morning till 10 at night, both days? Well, Sunday doesn't go as late, but are they gonna work the whole, that'll be like their 40-hour week type thing, they'll work the whole weekend?
Through the chair, no, that's not the intent. The intent is to work during peak times.
So they'll work 16 hours, or will they work partway through the week too?
At this point, it'll just be the weekends.
Is there anything else, Councillor Henderson?
How much was the pay then for that? Like, is it half of what we're paying the supervisor that does 5 days?
Excuse me. We can't hear you, Dave.
Oh, sorry. In general terms, yeah, the answer is yes.
Thank you. Seeing no other hands, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That is defeated. Is there anything else on the expansion request, Councillor Seven?
Thank you. So first, I just have a question about the process for the expansion requests that we're doing, because we're having motions to approve some and to take off others. I'm just wondering, and I do have comments about a lot of them. I just didn't know what the process was. Like, if we don't address them, then what? Like, would you like us to go through sort of individually and approve each one, or are we taking them off the list as we go?
For the expansions?
Yeah.
I didn't think we were going through each individual one. The question was, does any member of council have a question or comment on the expansion? So is there something in the expansion you want to ask about?
Yeah. I was just wondering if are we approving each one, or are we taking them off that we don't potentially?
Oh, sorry, we're gonna, I see the clerk has put her hand up.
Through the chair, if we could have clear direction on items in relation to the expansion request to be added to the draft budget or to be deferred, that would be appreciated. Again, it just helps staff in finalizing the draft 2022 budget documents, as well as sets the expectations for any items to come back in future years.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I misunderstood your question, Councilor Seven. Yeah, so we are going to be taking them collectively.
Okay, so can I just move to the next one on the list? And I guess I had questions about the custodian position, moving from part-time to full-time. And I'm just wondering if we have a sort of cost over time of what that would cost with the pension and benefits in addition. And I'm just wondering if this is based on sort of an assessment of, because we've been in COVID for a while with, I assume, perhaps less demand, or has that not affected the demand from the custodians having less activity in the facility?
Director St. Louis.
Through the chair, the impact to the 2022 budget is $42,600. And in general terms, again, it is benefit related, the increase. The challenge that we have is recruitment with part-time and retention. And we find it difficult to commit to events, not knowing what our staff complement could be. And although COVID has been slow for the last 2 years in terms of community halls, we see that ending very shortly in the year of 2022. And our problem will still be there. And the solution of adding to full-time in replacement of part-time hours is, we feel is important.
Thank you.
I saw Mayor Matheson's hand go up.
My question was with regard to the municipal cultural plan. It's $140,000 in the budget. 65,000 of it is for the development of the plan, and 75,000 is for the implementation. I was thinking that it's going to take some time to actually develop the plan, and whether or not the 75,000 for actual implementation could wait till the 2023 budget as a way to save, and that allows staff the time to work on the project and put the plan in place and to give it consideration. So that was one of the items I wanted to ask council to consider, of splitting that 140 and basically cutting 75,000 from this year.
Could I get a seconder for that before we take comments? Councilor Ritzma, Director St. Louis.
Yeah, through the chair, I think there may need to be a clarification. I don't believe the implementation is actually in the 2022 budget. It is only the plan, and the expansion request form is not correct. And in the recreation program budget, there is an expansion request for the cultural plan. I believe that $65,000, and that we removed the resources and we'll move it into the 2023 budget. I don't believe the funding is even in the budget, but maybe the acting director of corporate services.
Thank you, Director. I think that, yes, that's correct. The 140 that's included in there on the expansion request listing is reflected in the budget as 65,000. So it's a bit of a miscommunication on our parts, and I apologize for that.
Okay. So does that change what you're requesting at all, Mayor Matheson? Or?
Well, I'd love to cut 75,000, but if they've already cut it, it's kind of impossible to do it twice. So
then we no longer have a motion on this
no.
particular topic. Okay. Is there anything else on the expansion list anybody wants to look at? Councilor Vasilakos.
The municipal partnership program, given, I think it's really important that we do it. Do we have staff resources and everything else to realistically get that done this year? I'm just thinking COVID's kind of dragging out a little bit, and then we're going to have some like recovery work that gets done. I'm just wondering, I know, and I'm just not exactly sure with that municipal partnership program, how much activity there may be around that this year. Is there any potential to either spread that work over 2 years or defer it to early 2023? Just curious.
If I could ask the manager of recreation to respond, if that's okay. I believe he's on the line.
I'd be happy to. Thank you through the chair. Certainly the first phase of the municipal sponsorship program or partnership program is to inventory assets. This year would be a good time to go through all of the assets to which we think there's a value to and start to create the program. So I would think that this year would be a good time to do that phase of the project, leaving phase 2 being the selling of our assets once they've been identified to 2023.
If I may, what kind of an impact would that make on that budget of $50,000? Realizing that we're now nickel and diming, but I'm just curious.
Through the chair, I would expect that the $50,000 that is being proposed here for phase 1 in 2022, that there would not be any less or any more required for that phase this year.
Oh, so the $50,000 is simply for that first phase, not for the complete, not for both. Okay.
Yes, through the chair.
That clarifies it. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Councilor Clifford.
On the police records manager, I know we talked about it, but is there any chance to have an update on that, just to explain exactly how that's going to help the police?
Is the chief or deputy chief available?
Yes, through you, Chair. Thank you very much. With respect to the civilian records manager position, just to provide council with some background, this position was in the organizational structure of the police back in 2015. And through a retirement, there was a decision made to remove that position from the structure and delegate the work in the position throughout other people within the police service, including some of the senior uniform staff. Over the course of the past, now going on 7 years, and with all of the increases in technology and records and digital evidence management, and all of the information that will be obtained through the body-worn camera project, there was a need for that position with a new job description and new responsibilities brought back into the organizational structure. So the civilian records manager position will, in addition to dealing with all of the physical records and the MFIPA requests and what have you, will also provide some supervisory responsibilities to make it a managerial position, and provide supervision to our communication staff in the building, which is currently not supervised on a consistent basis. Deputy, if there are any other questions, or the deputy can fill in some of the additional information specific to the position if you would like.
Thanks, Chief.
Thank you. And through the chair, I'd just like to add one major component that we anticipate the position helping us with is the implementation of NG 911. So as the committee may or may not know, NG 911 is coming, and we are prepping ourselves for that. We anticipate going live with that in 2024 at this point, but as I'm sure everyone can appreciate, there's quite a bit of work involved in building that system, working with our Pride partners to make sure that our 911 capacity remains intact and is ready for the future.
Okay, thanks. Councilor Clifford, did you want to follow up with this on this one?
No, that's fine. I appreciate your comments.
Councilor Seven.
Thank you. I did have a question for the chief or the deputy. And do we have an idea, do you know what the salary was for the resource coordinator before the retirement, or what the initial, I guess, entry would have been for that position? Is it comparable to what's being proposed for the records manager?
Chair, through you, I will defer that to the deputy. He has the details on the salary piece.
So the short answer is we're proposing a lower rate of pay than what would have been with the previous position. We feel it's what we've applied, or sorry, made application for here is appropriate for the work that we anticipate the person doing. We do acknowledge that as the position is developed and as we learn more about the roles and capacities, we may have to review the salary in the future. But short answer is, in my view, it would be less than what we were paying the person before.
Okay, thank you. And I did want to ask about the records manager and the mental health coordinator positions. It says that they are a one-year pilot. Is that, can you just clarify, is that a one-year contract that would be renewed or turned permanent after 1 year?
Yeah, through the chair. Thank you, Councillor, for bringing that forward. Yes, these are both one-year pilot positions. So the mental health, wellness and resiliency coordinator is a 1 year temporary full-time contract position. So what we have done is entered into an agreement with the Huron Perth Health Alliance to, for lack of a better term, second a member of their crisis team into the police service for 1 year to pilot the program. and that is being funded, of course, by the police service. The records manager position is a one-year temporary assignment that we have advertised internally. And should there be an internal candidate selected, then we will backfill that individual's position within the organization as we further develop the position.
Okay, great, thank you,
Steve. Is there anything else from expansions? I look to the clerk, who would be looking for a motion to accept the expansions request report with any amendments proposed by council.
So through the chair, yes, we would be looking for direction to approve the expansion requests, excluding the manager inclusion, equity, indigenous initiatives, and the coordinator equity, inclusion, accessibility initiatives, as we already received direction on that, along with the climate change coordinator. So it'd be everything else that we have not considered to this point.
Okay, Councilor Seven.
So can I just clarify to the chair or the clerk? So if there are a couple items that I would not like to see approved, would I take those separately, or how would be best approach for that?
Through the chair, I think for expediency, it may just be helpful to go through the remaining items one by one, ask for a motion, call the question, and then proceed forward.
Thank you. You will correct me if I start one that we've already approved, Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, yes, I will.
Thank you. Community services, recreation, custodian.
Councillor Gaffney, could I ask for a clarification?
Of course.
I believe that the Director of Corporate Services had said that as a budget impact, this would be looking at like I think it's 246 or something like that. Like, if we're approving each of these positions, are we approving the budget impact at that 50%? Like, that's what I need some clarity on what we're approving for each of the individual items, and how that impacts the total impact to levy.
Madam Clerk, would we be further ahead to give direction at our next meeting, or is that not possible?
Through the chair, I am looking to the acting director, but I believe if we approve these items with the understanding that it's for the positions, it's 50% gapping, then we can certainly complete that tonight. And then that would provide staff with the necessary time to make amendments and to reflect these changes for a future version to be presented. If not at the next meeting, at the regular council meeting when the budgets are to be considered.
Thank you. Councillor Ingram.
Thank you. And I just want to clarify that was a 50% on average. So it's not 50% for each individual position. It was 50% on average.
Acting Director.
Thank you, through the chair. It would be how we would present this in the overall scheme of things is 50% for excluding the manager of the diversity manager, because we've already addressed that. Any of the going forward ones, starting with the custodians all the way through to the others, that we would be looking at 50% for each of them individually. If some come in, like are brought in a few months early or a few months later, then that'll just be reflected as a variance to the budget, which like for most departments would not necessarily be so visible as an outlying variance, but that's generally how we would present it. I wouldn't necessarily go and say this one specific position was 50% and one was 30% and one was that. Like, we would just kind of apply the 50% across the board and then deal with any variances throughout the year for each of the ones. I would expect, like I said, some will be over, some will be under, but overall then we have the direction to proceed. Does that answer the question?
Well, I'm not exactly sure what we're doing next, Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, my recommendation would be to start with the recreation custodians and call for a mover and a seconder to approve that expansion request with the understanding that it'd be at 50% on average.
Okay. I see some head nod going on. Item 1, custodian. Councillor Vasilakos and Councillor Ritzma. Any questions or comments on custodian for community services? See none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Transit supervisor weekends. Moved by Councillor Beatty, seconded by Councillor Bunting. Any comments or questions on Councillor Clifford?
Yeah, I was going to ask the director, if the employee is only on the weekend, how's the employee trained by, like hire someone? How do we plan on training that individual?
That individual would be trained by the current manager or the current supervisor.
Thank you, Mr. St. Louis. I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Development Services, Clerk Secretary. Moved by Councillor Vasilakos, seconded by Councillor Burback. Any questions? Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Library, Makerspace Assistant. Moved by Councillor Seven, seconded by Councillor Ingram. Any questions? Those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Public Housing Review Officer. Councillor Burback and Councillor Henderson. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Records Manager. Moved by Councillor Clifford, second by Councillor Bunting. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Mental Health, Wellness, and Resiliency Coordinator for $700. Moved by Councillor Bunting, seconded by Councillor Ritzma. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Municipal Partnership Program. Moved by Councillor Beatty and seconded by Councillor Ritzma. Any questions? Councillor Seven.
I just wanted to note that I'm opposed to this program.
Thank you very much. Anything else? All those in favor? Opposed, if any? One opposed, that carries. Municipal.
Two opposed.
Sorry?
There was 2 opposed.
I'm sorry, I missed that. My apologies. Municipal Cultural Plan. Moved by Councillor Clifford, second by Councillor Ingram.
Actually, I have a question. I believe it's already in the budget. Is it not? Like in the, like I thought we explained that was already in the other budget.
I'm waiting to hear from someone like Mr. St. Louis.
Yeah, both of those programs are listed in the operations budget in recreation programs, although they are listed as an expansion request as they're both new.
Now I look to the clerk to confirm whether I'm just keep going carrying on with what I'm doing or if something changed.
Through the chair, I'm going to seek clarification from the acting director on whether a motion is required or because it's reflected in the operating, whether we'll just account for it in that section.
Thank you through the chair. This is a little bit confusing, and I do apologize about that some are included and some aren't in the proposed budget. But because these are expansion requests, we still do want council to weigh in on this. So if for whatever reason these weren't going to proceed, that could have a levy impact as well. So to answer the question, you keep going is from the list, and then I'll be able to summarize for you at the end of the conversation what the result is or the total impact is.
Okay. So you still move that, Councillor Clifford?
Oh, I need a clarification because I believe it's got 140,000, but that's not the actual amount. So I have to get a clarification on the actual amount.
Mr. St. Louis?
The actual amount for the cultural plan is $65,000, and it's listed in the operating budget, $65,000.
Okay, that's fine. I will move it then.
And Councillor Ingram agrees. Councillor Henderson?
I'm confused. Did you say that the total is in the operating budget already under community services, but it's also listed here? So is it in there twice or not? The amount.
Through the chair, I'll just jump in. I don't see the chair there, but I can answer the question. So it's included in the proposed budget figures overall for these two in community services, but because they do represent expansion requests, we've brought them out for a decision or a direction at this point. So if council were to change the direction or not want to include these in the proposed budget, then they would have a direct levy impact to do that. A reduction rather. So a reduction to the levy if we didn't proceed with them, as opposed to all of the others that would be in addition to the levy if we proceed with them. Did that answer your question, Councillor Henderson?
No, I'm so confused. I'm so sorry. I don't know. I got a brain freeze, I guess. Basically, we're just bringing the motion forward now to approve the hiring, but the actual cost of it's only in the community services part of the budget.
So these the positions that relate to new staffing requirements, we've already council's already provided direction on those. Now we're in the section of the expansion requests that relate to service enhancements, and those have been included in the proposed draft documents within the divisional budgets. But because they represent additional enhancements or additional services over and above what we currently provide, we've extracted them out so that council can have the opportunity to discuss them further.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
If there's nothing else, all those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Sewer acoustic inspection program is covered. Is there Councillor 7?
My apologies. Did you say that's covered, or do you need a motion for that one?
It's a user pay item, so I think it's Madam Clerk. Do you need anything from us on that particular item?
Through the chair, my understanding is we would require that direction, but I also see the acting director has her hand up as well.
Thank you through the chair. I'll just speak to that. Yes, we did, again, because this is representing a service enhancement or an over and above our regular operations, we are seeking council's approval / direction for proceeding with that project. It does not have a levy impact. It just is paid through user fees. So, but the project itself is requesting approval.
Councillor 7, I will take your motion. Second by Councillor Ritzma. Any questions? All those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Councillor Ingram?
Thank you. My apologies. I just wanted to let you know, I do have another meeting at 8 o'clock, so I will be dropping off very shortly from this meeting.
Oh, that's too bad. Are we done with this particular item 6, Madam Clerk?
Through the chair, it's my understanding we've concluded those items and could proceed to item 7.
Well, we're going to proceed to a 10-minute leg stretch. So we'll see everybody back here at 8 o'clock or thereabouts. Welcome back, Cody.
And to you too, Dave.
I can tell you your chair feels a whole heck of a lot better. I really had to stretch my legs. If we have quorum and you're ready to go, Madam Clerk.
Through the chair, yes, we do have quorum.
Okay, we will move on to item 7, 2022 draft operating budget. And we'll go through each department, starting with item 7.1, Mayor, Council, CAO operating budget. Does anybody have any questions or requests for changes or clarifications? Councilor Ritzman.
Yeah, it's more of a comment, I guess, a question as well. I know earlier, quite earlier, the CAO had expressed that they were tracking the cost of COVID with hopes of the province reimbursing. Any idea through the chair to the CAO, any idea of whether we know monies are coming for that, or so that question's going to the CAO. Thank you.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, we have been tracking our direct COVID related expenses since the beginning as part of the declared emergency. We would do that with any declared emergency that is done. We have received COVID related funding from the province throughout the pandemic. Some of it has been very specific, targeted to transit, as well to social services relief, homelessness and housing. So we have been very appreciative of the province with respect to that funding, which has assisted us with the additional expenses that we have incurred. As you know, our revenue is down, specifically with respect to recreation and parking. I have not heard anything specific that we will have funding made available to us for some of our other COVID-related expenses, such as our PPE, any of our overtime, any of the partnerships. I think of all the assistance that we have been giving to Huron-Perth Public Health in staffing the mass vaccination clinics, and all of the work that our CEMC has done in assisting Huron-Perth Public Health as well as Health Alliance with the assessment center and the mass vaccination clinics. We will continue to pursue it, but we may not have that specific funding provided to us, but it is something that we are certainly tracking, and we will be following up with the province to see if there is anything further.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Clifford, if Councilor Ritzman is done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to ask in 101, which is the mayor's, and 102, which is council, if there was any consideration for conference expenses, travel and mileage, special project. So that's in 101. And I'd have to ask them here what he thought. Obviously, it's his budget. So I'd like to ask him what he thought about those three.
The conference, I think, Councillor Clifford, it's quite safe to say that the only conference that could possibly be in person this year would be AMO. That is at best the only chance of probably getting together. FCM is already moving to online. Roma this week, we've been online for it. So I do think there's probably an underspend on conferences to be there. As far as special initiatives, I'm just looking here. Special projects, there's nothing budgeted. As you can see, last year, I think $95 was put towards that. So I'm not too concerned about it. So if you wanted to, you could cut conferences in half in case AMO does go, and you could probably take the special projects away. I think there's maybe $8,000 there if you want to take it out. The only challenge is next year with whoever the new incumbent would be, you'd have to add that back in, and they would no doubtably want to attend the conferences, which are the normal ones to attend: OSAM, AMO, FCM, probably Good Roads, Roma. So just, it's a one-year saving, but it will put the money back in next year's budget, I would think.
Councillor Clifford.
So I will put a motion on the floor for 101 that we take 8,000 out, and so that's half of the conferences and the 5,000 for special project.
Seconder. Councillor Henderson. No. No. Councillor Henderson. No. Seconder. Councillor Ritzma. Councillor Henderson.
Well, by taking it out, if we don't use it, the money's still there for other projects near the end of the year type thing. Or it can go back to the budget. But if we take it out, that shows a higher increase for next year in that department. And I've seen that happen before where we reduce something and then the department in good faith agreed to that reduction. And then the next year when they tried to bring it back, because it was regular time, there was objections for the increase. So that's the only problem I see with it.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I understand that, but I don't ever, in the longest while, when we're talking about 8% increase, if we're really interested in helping right now, if we don't start cutting some things that we can cut, and we know we're not going to spend it, like we know with COVID, half these conferences aren't going to happen. I do understand that it will have to put back in, but honestly, if anyone's interested in making some cuts, here we're making cuts. It's not affecting the average person. It's not affecting, it's not a service cut. So anyways, if we have any interest in cutting, we're going to have to start somewhere. If we have no interest, say Libby.
Anything else? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? I'm not sure if everybody voted there. Could I see who's in favor again? Opposed? That's carried. And you had something from 102, Councillor Clifford?
Mr. Chair, yes, I was also, the conferences was 16,000. I believe we could cut that in half. And then, and I'm not sure about special events because I'm not sure what exactly we have planned. In 2020, we spent 14,000. In 2021, we spent 900. So I think there's some opportunity in special events, but I'm not really familiar what's all in that. So I'd have to ask staff what's included.
Mayor Matheson?
Special events is the community award night, is the Bronze Star presentation, Canada Day, other community events that we have sponsored in the past. For example, this year is the 100th anniversary of the Rotary Club, and there was talk about hosting a reception for them in Market Square for the community, items like that. So that is normally what comes through that type of budget. It's things that come forward to council and they look for a place to have it because it's a one-off, and that is normally the place it comes from. Let's hope by the second half of the year, we're congregating somewhere, celebrating something. Over to you, Joan.
Thank you. And through you, Mr. Chair, just further to the mayor's response there, I just want to add that this also includes funds for the council inauguration event that will be held later this fall. So there are some expenses incurred because of that that are covered in this particular line.
So, Councilor Clifford.
So I'll put a motion on the floor that we on the conferences, instead of having 16,000, it'll be 8,000 in case AMO and whatnot is on.
Could I get a seconder for that? Councilor Seven. There's nothing else. I'll call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? And that's carried. Anything from G111? Oh, Councilor Seven.
Thank you. So under 102, I had a question under the meals and meeting costs. How much of that do we know is the meal portion? Do we have an idea of what portion of that would be meals?
Joan?
Thank you. Through you. So in response to the question from Councillor Seven, these are costs associated with meals provided at council meetings for once we get back to in-person meetings. It's also involving any costs associated with meetings involving the mayor and or councillors for that. So there is an allowance in the budget for that.
Okay, thank you. So before COVID, I did think that meals was maybe something that I was looking at as not continuing, just for the most part. You know, I didn't find it necessary, I guess, personally, a lot of the time. And so I would, and then before I make a motion, I had a question also about the memberships cost. And if there's any sort of, I don't know the cost of memberships. I was just wondering what memberships that includes.
Thompson?
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. For the memberships, this includes the annual memberships for the city for AMO and FCM. And there has been an increase of $2,000 for those, both of those associations. So the funds in there are to cover those membership renewals.
Thank you. Yeah, so for 102, I'd like to make a motion that the meals and meeting costs be reduced to 2,000. I guess that would leave room for meals for the bigger events or the longer events, but I think.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that motion? Councillor Clifford? Councillor Henderson?
Well, pre-COVID, when we used to meet, And mostly we just got meals when we were doing budget because we start budget, around 5:30, and sometimes we go to 8 or 9 at night. And there's a lot of people coming from their jobs where they get off work at 5. So we have a meal. And when we're talking a meal, it's like Swiss chalet, or sometimes it's been pizza, sometimes it's been subs. And also staff has just got off work and coming to the meetings, and I will not support cutting that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Crawford.
Well, Councilor Henderson brings up a great point, but we are doing the budget right now. And the council coming in won't start like hardly in December. It almost always starts in January. So that expense is not going to happen as far as the budget expense. So I think to cut that by 3,000 and keep 2,000 in, I think that's appropriate, because we aren't going to be eating at the budget. I ate my own meal tonight.
Thank you. Councilor Henderson.
Well, it would all depend if COVID ends at the end of March and we start meeting. I mean, maybe we could cut it a bit this year, because we probably won't be starting till maybe April meeting again. Maybe we can cut it a bit then. Again, all these things we're cutting, just remember, we have to add them all back in next year. And we could be looking at 10% or something next year, because we've got a lot of things on the go, the Grand Trunk and the renewable gas project. We don't know what's going to happen with that. And, there's other things, the regular maintenance of our streets and the projects that are going to come forth. Anyway, it's just my 2 cents.
I would not advise holding your breath on the COVID coming the end in 8 weeks. Any other questions or comments on this item? Then I will call the question. All those in favor? Five in favor. Opposed? Four opposed. That carries. Councilor Matheson, or Mayor Matheson.
Well, we're making a lot of what I would call symbolic cuts that aren't going to add up to much, but we're trying to show that we're moving ahead. We didn't cut any capital. We're just starting into this. Why don't we talk about a 10% wage cut for council? If we want to make symbolic cuts and we're talking about how we want to do this, if that's what we're going to do for a budget, we should maybe take a 10% wage cut across ourselves.
Councilor Clifford.
I would support a 20% cut, your worship.
Great.
So I have no problem with that at all. But you call this symbolic, but actually they do add up. And if people are happy with an 8%, that's fine, but we have to make some cuts somewhere.
No, Tom, I'm not saying it's not important. I just looked that we've gone through a lot of the capital and we didn't cut anything. And we talk about a tax increase of 8%. It's actually 5.8 and change that the net effect is. And we're cutting $8,000 from $65 million of levy. So I'm just suggesting that, we need to make some serious cuts at some point.
So you're making a motion, your worship?
No, Tom has one he wants to put forward.
And if I could, the actual increase is 8%, because we don't know what the school tax will be. So I think we should be talking about what the real increase, when we keep going back to 5%, it's almost an 8% increase. And I would have no problem, but I know it wouldn't pass if council, they have a 20% cut on council's wages, but I know that's not going to happen. So I would put it on the floor, but it's not going to go anywhere, quite frankly.
Councilor Vasilakos.
So again, this goes back to my comment about we can sort of go through line by line, and some of it is, it is symbolic. But my preference would be that we did things that were long-term, not one-off, not 1 year, not that it's going to come back and like, we're not, again, I use the term punting, but I'm sorry, that's what it feels like sometimes. If we want to be serious about decreasing this budget, which is the council budget, then we should maybe be looking at not reducing individual, like again, since I have committed that I'm not running as a councillor again, I'm going to make the point that maybe we have too many councillors, because part and parcel of that is if you reduce the size of council, you reduce it's a permanent change. It's operational from year to year. It reduces it, then the food costs and the conference costs and all those other costs go down, and that entire budget item goes down. So if we want to be serious about making some systemic or like some structural change in each of these budgets, we can't be looking at what we cut this year that then will come back next year. We should be looking at how do we make permanent changes that impact this budget moving forward. So maybe we should be looking at, there's 11 of us here. Maybe we really should have 7 or 8. And is that enough to represent in a city, in a single tier city of, 32,000 people? I don't know, but I'm just saying those are the kinds of changes we should be looking at, not the small Pyrrhic victories of 4,000 here and 2,000 there.
Councillor Henderson.
We already looked at reducing the size of council, and we had a big discussion about that. Already some of us are on 7 or 8 other committees. So if you reduce the amount of councillors, that's a lot more. There's 23 advisory committees, there's outside boards. There's other subcommittees of different committees that we're on that we get involved in. And, some people, I'm retired, but some people are still working full time. That makes it very hard. And as far as a wage reduction, when we got our increase, we hadn't had one for many years. We are still behind what other municipalities our size were. But we all felt, well, at least I did, felt very grateful that we had support of the committee that looked at that to say that we were underpaid. I know people in other municipalities my size that they make more and they have benefits. They have different things, right? I mean, we have the option not for benefits, but I think it's very unfair because most of us have got used to that money coming in, and I'm retired, so I appreciate it. I mean, when I came on council, I wasn't making anything. I was volunteering everywhere, but I had no idea some of the costs that are associated with council, like buying different clothes, keeping your hair up, having to go to appointments, people asking for donations all the time, asking you to buy tickets to their events. There's a lot of expense being a counselor too. And I was shocked the first couple of years. So I appreciate the fact that we've got a raise, because I feel like I have a breath of fresh air for donating and being able to donate more. But that's just my 2 cents.
Thanks, Bonnie. Councillor 7.
Thank you. I did have a questions about 111, the CAO's office, if it's okay with the chair.
Of course.
Okay. Just under the consultants, the number for consultants and the number for special projects. I'm just wondering I noticed for consultants, the year to date is 0, but it was budgeted for quite a bit. And then the draft budget is also quite a bit. And then the special projects, these numbers just seem to fluctuate. I was just information seeking about what causes that.
Ms. Thompson?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. So for the consultants, this is being taken from grants and reserves with respect to that. The projects identified for this year include leadership development, also includes the diversity, equity, and inclusiveness implementation and training portions. This includes funds for Indigenous consultations as we begin that journey. It also includes service delivery implementation. And again, that is drawing from the municipal modernization funding that we have received to seek out those service delivery and efficiencies. With respect to the special projects, that includes the business case. So council gave direction in October to proceed with a business case to assist with, now that GO Train is here in Stratford, to assist with a business case. It also includes the Community Hub fundraising feasibility phase 1. Again, that is being drawn from a reserve for the Grand Trunk master plan. And there's also funds in there for strategic priorities as well as property sale and disposition. So as council knows, we do have odds and sods parcels of land that do come up where they're maybe in a neighborhood. And so we do need some funds to assist with the disposal of those lands as they come up, such as creation of a reference plan, if a market assessment appraisal is required. So there is some funding in there. Some of that tends to be offset by any proceeds from the sale of those lands. But those are the identified projects under special projects, as well as the consulting fees. And I do believe that the Acting Director of Corporate Services can also speak to this if there are further questions or clarifications on the reserves.
No, that's great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
Just a question for the clerk before I make a motion. Are we out of time for reducing the size of council? Like, or do we have time still? I forget all the dates and they get muddled about when we can make those kinds of changes for the upcoming election.
So through the chair, I would need to double check the date, but we did present a report in 2021 and there was direction to maintain the current complement. So we would need to review the status of it and what would be required in order to potentially reconsider it if we can.
Okay, so I'm just going to throw that. I'm wondering if we could get a motion to bring that back to, is it next week's meeting where we have that? And if anybody else would like to second that request, that we bring that item back to council.
Mayor Mass.
I'm just seconding the motion.
Yeah, but I don't see any other hands, so I guess we'll, Councillor Clifford, then Councillor Ritzma.
Yeah, I support the idea, but I don't think it's going to help our 2022 budget. It's not going to have any effect at all on it. So like I support that, but I don't know how it's going to help right now, quite frankly.
Councillor Ritzma?
No, I had my hand up to second that. Thank you.
Councillor Vasilakos.
I realize it's not going to help us this year necessarily, but it may very well, if we are going to be making some of these one-time cuts that'll come back next year, if we were to move and making some kind of a structural change to that budget, then at least we'll have less of a hit next year. And I think that's my reasoning is around that. Like, we can go through right now and we can come up with bits and pieces that are just going to come back in next year. But how about we make some changes for next year that then actually can offset what we're doing with the one-offs?
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Councillor Vasilakos.
And I have another suggestion, and it isn't mine. I believe Councillor Ingram has brought it up in the past. I do think that we do have a lot of committees. We do have a lot of outside boards. We do actually sit on, and we haven't had we haven't had a look at what of those are statutorily required, which ones are do we need to sit on, because some of that workload I think we can alleviate on a smaller council by reviewing some of those appointments and some of those boards. And so I'm wondering if we could have a chance during these budget discussions to review some of those appointments as well. And maybe if I guess a motion to bring that list to the upcoming budget committee meeting, and we can have a look at them.
Councillor Clifford. Second.
I'll second that.
Okay. I guess the only thing I'd ask is that sort of a horse before the cart thing, but we'll let council decide.
I was just going to add, there is a per diem that goes with belonging to these boards, and then there's also mileage that's involved, and so there may be a number of them where the usefulness or the contributions that we're making are not that significant. So there could be some longer term savings and less workload for a smaller council.
All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Anything else in G111? Community services. G711, parks and forestry. Councilor Clifford.
I believe it's in here. I talked about this earlier. I don't know if we have to have, I know flowers are nice and likely important to a lot of people, but 2020 and 2021, we didn't have the flowers and didn't hire the extra staff. I think here's an area we could make a substantial saving, not have as many flowers and not have the staff to take care of them. So I think there's some opportunity here, and I'm not going to make a motion right now, but I wonder if there's an interest in that.
Councillor Henderson.
Well, I don't know about the rest of you, but I've heard several complaints about how we don't have all the flowers back. And I know of a city, and I can't think of the name of them right now. They decided 1 year just to slash from their budget. And when they saw the repercussions, the next year they quickly put it back in. I mean, for the amount of money that we spend on flowers, I forget what it was, it's relatively small, especially since the horticultural takes care of, I think, 8 of the beds out of the 23. And I mean, I don't know, it just makes you feel good when you're out in your city and we look beautiful, right? I mean, you know, we've managed the last 2 years by not hiring the students, which gives employments to people in our community. Not that we're, you know, looking at that, but still, it has helped the students over the years. And some of them, I think, have gone on to actually come back to the city and work, or gone on to become gardeners or whatever.
I think the manager is here if anybody wants to ask him any questions. Councilor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask if on the part-time staff, if we hired half of the people that we normally hire, what effect would that have on the flower beds?
Is Quinn available?
I'm here.
Good, go ahead.
So a full complement of temporary staff is 24. We haven't had that in 2 years. Last year, I think we had 4 in the parks. So we budgeted about 360,000 to do the complement of 24. So if you cut that in half, what do you got? 175?
Thanks, Quinn. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I understand on that part of the math, but if we only had 12 instead of 24, how would that affect the flower, like the beds and whatnot? Like
the number of staff and the amount of flowers we're bringing in actually do go hand in hand, because once you put them in, we have to maintain them, we have to keep them watered. What we did last year is, because we didn't have as much staff, we just put up the 300 hanging baskets and multiple planters downtown. And then we did some key areas. We did the cemetery, we did City Hall, Shakespearean Gardens, and some key ones. But without the staff, we can't plant the entire realm. I'm not sure where Councillor Henderson got 23, but we have almost 100 beds if you put them all together, and including the cemetery. So by hiring half the staff, I mean, it's not just the flower beds. Like, we have so many things to do that we've just been kind of keeping the lights on the last few years. You know, painting and small tree pruning, low limbing streets and trail maintenance. And if things start opening up, like the ball diamonds, we're gonna have more litter control, more garbage to do. It all goes hand in hand when on what we're doing. So the flowers is a big part of it. It's the most visual part of it, but it's not as big as you think as far as is our budget.
Okay, thanks, Quinn. Councillor Ritzma.
Yeah, so not only for our citizens, but we are a tourism town, and this is an investment in a very important sector in our community. So as much as, you know, I'd like to see some dollars saved on different items, we still have to be conscious that we are welcoming tourists to our town, and it is an important part of our economy, and we may need to make an investment in this sector. So I don't believe I would support the cutting of something that important to our community.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
If I were to be looking in this budget for something to cut, again, that becomes sort of more structural and long-term, I'm looking at the lawn maintenance and understanding that changing and getting rid of lawn maintenance may then actually just shift people to doing things that haven't been done or haven't been maintained. So I'm not exactly sure the savings necessarily from a personnel perspective, but I'm looking at it from the point of view of there is some lawn maintenance and grass cutting that has to happen, because you have things like ball diamonds in soccer fields and places where children play, and you don't want anyone tripping and those kinds of things. But then there is quite an environmental impact in the positive in not maintaining large swaths of grass that has to be cut. Both because of the carbon capture of allowing things to grow and having more biomass, but then also the lawn maintenance equipment and some of the emissions and things like that. So rather than sort of going after sort of the flower beds necessarily, I mean, I'm not convinced that all 100 beds need to be kept forever. We could have a relook at the ones that are, you know, key. But the bigger one that I would want to actually have a look at is, are there savings to be had in that lawn maintenance that are also savings in terms of our greenhouse gas plan? And I'm wondering if when you could speak a little bit to that and around that sort of concept of wilding.
Yeah, we have looked at that before, and we have quite a few areas where we have naturalized. The pinch point comes when you start doing this in neighborhoods. We get lots of pushback just in these neighborhood parks where we start letting areas go natural. That's when the mosquitoes are our problem, and the bugs and the rodents and everything's coming from there. Again, we have done quite a few areas that there's not a lot of homes around. Some areas we have done where we actually reverted back and have cut them again, just on complaint. The grass cutting is contracted out. So this is what our contracted price was. So I don't think we'd be having any savings this year, but we could look at finding other areas to do that for in the future. Or, I mean, that the cost that grass cutting is now, I mean, we can almost look into doing it in-house at the same price or cheaper than where we're getting. So there is things to look at with that grass cutting piece. I just don't think with the grass going to start in a few, 3-4 months, I don't think we have a lot of time to start messing around with it right now.
I would be sorry, just as a follow-up to that, but then again, not this year, but maybe if we could have started this process that maybe there is an education piece around that could go out to the public as the greenhouse gas emissions are becoming more prominent as we look at having a corporate strategy. Like, I'm just thinking about, as we look at some of our flower beds and look at, are there locations that are really heavily reliant on watering, and it's not like, are there, and I'm just wondering if there's a sort of a comprehensive look at all of these operations that maybe isn't this year, but maybe we could see some savings over time that would help offset some of these catch-up problems that we're having in the global budget.
Yeah, we can look at areas, definitely look at areas that we could natural regeneration areas where we can, areas that aren't overly used. We can look at places that we can do that.
Okay, thank you. Councilor Clifford.
Yes, I'd like to put a motion on the floor that we don't do the goose management in 2022. And that would be an amount of $50,000.
Councilor Seven is going to second that motion, I suspect. Councilor Henderson.
I have a question. I think we've done 3 years now. My understanding was a 3 to 5 year plan. And if we stop doing it now, how quickly is it going to just revert back to all those geese and that being here? Because my understanding is we oiled over 100 eggs last year. So that would be 100 right there. And, the complaints will increase again about all the poop on the sidewalks, the picnic benches, the grass, and
the actual tender came in at $38,000 for goose management this year, not 60. I'm not sure where that number always comes from. We do budget 50,000, and that's because there's a contingency in there that if we want to do a relocation, if the populations get too high, there's a relocation tool in there that for about $10,000 to do a one-time relocation of a high percentage of the population of birds down to Jack Miner's bird sanctuary. So we haven't used that tool yet, but we keep that into the budget. So the actual number is $38,000 for goose management, just to get that number out there. Those geese will, like, we did 250 eggs, which was the maximum amount of eggs that we could addle this year. And that was just around the river. So those populations would be coming back here this year. So every 2 years, the numbers would double. This project, or what we've done here, has almost become a victim of its own success, because now we've reduced the numbers, where the soccer field's usable again, the pathways aren't quite as bad. People can picnic along the edges again. I mean, we're never going to get rid of all the birds. We're never going to get rid of all the poop. It's just the way it is. It's just, we have no predators down there. So the numbers keep getting higher and higher and higher. So by us doing this goose management, we're keeping the numbers at the population at a manageable amount. It's never going to be zero. We're never going to have no problems, but we're trying to keep the population at a manageable amount for an area that doesn't have any predators to do anything else.
Thanks, Gwen. Councilor Ritzman.
Yeah, so so once again, this is a benefit to all of our residents and our tourists. I wondered if there could be a friendly amendment that we reduce that budget line that says 60,000 to 38,000. And then you'd have some savings there, but still a goose management program. I put that towards Councillor Clifford and Councillor Seven.
Well, I'd like to hear from the acting director before we move ahead with that.
I just wanted to add a bit more context and information on the figure. So in the 2022 budget, the number is 50,000, and that's made up of 45,000 towards goose management and 5,000 towards just some general contractor costs relating to things like dust control or pathway repairs generally for parks. So it's not strictly goose management in that line item. So the $45,000, absolutely, we could look at reducing that to the 38. That's what I would focus on that particular thing, and that would be my recommendation. But we certainly would. I just wanted to make sure council had the full picture there.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
I want to ask about the eggs. Is it our staff that take care of the eggs, or is it the contractor that takes care of the eggs that we?
It's a combination of both. We, the contractor does it, but we also assist, and when we find the eggs, we do it ourselves. We addle them ourselves, or he does most of it, but because we're always around, we know where a lot of these nests are. So it's a little bit of a combination.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you. So I guess I'm going to call this the hill that I'm going to choose to die on here. To my colleagues who are, looking for ways to save and cut dollars to get us down to whatever magic number we may have, I'm going to share that I believe that this is very short-sighted. It is an easy win to pick out flowers, to cut out geese management, and get $7,000 out of from 45 to 38 or whatever you're looking to get. These very short wins have long-term detriment to our community. These are, to say that we have a quality of life that we brag about is part of what we share when we're selling our city to the world. That when we are able to enjoy this year round, that our tourists get to enjoy it for their short time that when they're here, but we as a community get to enjoy it every day. The beauty of our park system is something that is a jewel of this city. To say that you want to cut goose management so that we can't walk around the parks without having to dodge goose droppings, or to say that we can't enjoy the beauty of a flower bed. Again, such a short-sighted vision to save a few dollars. Shame on us if this is what we think is the win that's going to make a big difference in our budget.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
Well, I'm glad you have that opinion, Councillor Beattie, and you're entitled to it. But I'd like to ask our parks manager, if we only concentrated on the eggs, what kind of cost? Because is it the eggs that are really helping, or is it the dogs and the drones? Can you explain what is helping? What helps? Is it the removing the eggs, or the drones and the dogs? And obviously it's a combination, but if the eggs were gone, would that help substantially?
Yeah, they work hand in hand. The eggs is a big part of it. Like, that's because you're not getting the new generation, or you're reducing the number in the new generation. Well, we do get lots of flock. We have a permanent resident geese here already. I mean, that have been here forever. But the dog piece and the scaring in the spring is to deter new mates from settling here and having more eggs here. So, when geese are flying over and there's lots of farmland around us, there's lots of fields around us, and then all of a sudden you have this big body of water, safe body of water surrounded by grass. It's like a Shangri-La. So they come down, and then that's where they want to stay. That dog piece is to keep them away, not to get them too comfortable here, so that they're not having eggs. And then those young aren't coming back and having eggs. It all works in conjunction with each other. would there be a, the egging is the nesting is a huge part of it. Like that's the first thing in the spring, finding out where the nests are, finding out and addling the eggs, and eliminating that next generation or most of that next generation from developing is a huge part of it. But then you still have you know, when we try to keep the geese away because so where they're not holding up traffic. And I mean, sometimes you got to value and you got to reflect on how we got here. I mean, 5 years ago you couldn't hardly drive down the river drive because the traffic was so backed up. So I mean, that's what I'm saying. It's almost become a victim of its own success. But I'll leave it with you.
Thanks, Quinn. Councillor Vasilakos.
I'm just going to take this as an opportunity to pitch the reduced amount of cut grass or lawn, because one of the ways that you can discourage wild fowl is by allowing some of the grass to grow, because a lot of times they'll come out of the water and head for the soccer field because that's where the grass is. So a little bit of wilding can also be used as a deterrent for some of them as well.
Yeah, that's one tool we've used. We've let the grass grow up along the edges of the river, and that's one of the tools that has been suggested to us. In that, if they can't get out of the water quickly or they can't get back to the water quickly, it deters them from the area. So yeah, it is a strategy.
Okay, thanks. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. So I just want to touch on a couple of things. This is something that is sort of an annual, I don't know, an annual endeavor. So I just wanted to go back to it, and I am happy to see that the price is 38,000 instead of the higher price it was, as council originally went for a price similar to that. And I think the comments, I think it was Councillor Beattie who it's people can enjoy the river again. I mean, just a reminder that we never have had a program like this in the past. And, you know, so the river area and the soccer fields and everything, they were always very enjoyable and usable by the residents and tourists alike. I have heard from many people who you know, we've had so many issues with the geese program so far, and there are many people who just can't enjoy going around the river and seeing the geese being harassed or things like that. And so, you know, we have a large section of the population who would prefer them left alone. And then also back to Councillor Henderson's point about this being a 3 to 5 year, I believe the original report said in it that once you discontinue that, and that's at any point, that it would just return back to the way it was previous. So this is, make no mistake, an indefinite expenditure for the city year to year. We didn't have a baseline to go off of, so we don't really have sort of the statistics or the data to know exactly how effective it is. Yeah, and it's just, you know, I support the motion. I think yeah, there are certainly alternatives to geese harassment and things, and I think you know, I wasn't going to get too into it this year, but I'm happy to see there's discussion around it. So.
Councillor Henderson.
I would just like to point out that I heard from several people, especially people in wheelchairs or mothers with or fathers with strollers, that now they can walk around the river and enjoy it before they couldn't, especially people in wheelchairs, because how do they watch their wheels on? So, you know, that wasn't even something I had thought about originally, but when I heard that, it made me feel a little sick to my stomach that, you know, that's 10 to 15% of our people in our community have some kind of a disability, and we have probably thousands of mothers, fathers, grandparents that push strollers or pull wagons around the river. And I think it's important, and I know that at the Parks Board meeting that Quinn reported that he's had several several calls from people thanking them for doing that, making it enjoyable, because it hasn't been for many years. That's just my 2 cents. But there is people that aren't.
Thank you. If there's nothing else, I'll call the question as long as we have a clear understanding of what the question is. Maybe the clerk could give her interpretation of what's been said here.
Through the chair, it's my understanding presently that the motion on the floor that was moved by Councillor Clifford and seconded by Councillor Seven is to remove funds in the amount of $45,000 for the goose management plan in the 2022 budget.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That does not carry. Thank you. Item G 721, recreation. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I still have a question on parks. I just want to know about the transfer to reserve fund of 317,000. In 2020, we had 100,000. If I could have a clarification on that transfer to reserve funds. It's 78. Who's it?
Mr. St. Louis.
Yeah, the transfer to reserve in parks supports the capital allocated to parks for 2022.
So I was just going to ask the increase from 2020 to 2022. Is there all those, like, is it projects that we plan?
Yeah, so it relates to the capital listing that is put forth in parks, and the total is 317,000. And unfortunately, most of it is, or the capital is supported by the tax levy, which is transferred from it.
Thank you. Councillor Vassal. Sorry, I'll let the director go first. Sorry, Kathy.
Thank you through the chair. Just to further that, this is one of the specific divisions that doesn't have, we're not able to use a combination of historical reserve transfers to support capital and current levy contributions. So this, in this particular example, the 317 represents almost 100% of the capital works that are required for the division. So that's, if that helps any to support the divisional managers or divisional directors comment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
So before we move from this, I'm wondering if I could make a referral to staff to come back with some thoughts around that lawn maintenance budget is huge. It's quite large, but come back with some a report on some possible ways to reduce that budget. I did hear that the budget, it's large enough that perhaps maybe it could be brought in-house, but and understanding Councillor Clifford that it's not going to help us this year, but I think it is time to have a look at that. So referral to staff to come back to community services with a report on possible ways to reduce that lawn maintenance budget.
Seconder, Councillor Burback. But this is not something we're expecting for next finance meeting. This is something that can go through normal channels as well.
That's why I said refer it back to community services. And if they want to throw in sort of those 100 flower beds and looking at, you know, height, that would be probably a good place to have a look at some of that as well.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clifford.
I was going to ask, is the contract for 2022, is it completed? Like, have we given that contract out for lawn maintenance for 2020?
Yeah, it's up. It's due up in actually the end of 2023. In one more year after 20. Yep.
Okay. Is there anything else in Parks and Forest? Oh, sorry. Could I get, if there's nothing else, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed?
I'm sorry, Dave. I lost track of what we're voting on.
On Councillor Balasagos's referral motion on the lawn cutting.
Oh, okay.
And lawn cutting and flower bed maintenance.
I will call the question again. All those in favor? Opposed? That's carried. Is there anything else in Parks and Forestry? Items G721, Recreation. Councillor 7? No?
Sorry.
Okay, no problem. Nothing for Recreation. Oh, Councillor Clifford?
Yeah, I was going to ask about like on our income, on our income overall, like with COVID, like if COVID goes on as long as it could go on, it also could be over. What effect is that going to have on our income? Have we taken that into account? Because if a brand new variant comes out and we're all tied up again, so I know it's in here for income, but is that an actual, like how can we tell if that's going to actually happen?
Mr. St. Louis?
Through the chair, we did take into consideration the loss of revenue for January. We are anticipating that we would have a full season. Most of our revenue is in the arena area. And we expect the seasons to start here at February 1st and continue on as normal, and hoping to have a full season of summer activities that will generate the same revenue that we did pre-COVID.
Knock on wood. Thanks, David. Councillor Burback.
Thank you. I have a general question. Probably, again, it's not something that's going to affect this year's budget, but when I look at things like snow removal, is there a way that we could sort of consolidate that with what Public Works is doing and have all the snow removal happening under or from one roof or from one budget? It just seems like there might be cost savings there. So just a general comment. See if the director.
It probably could be done. The issue is parking lots and roads are two different animals. Parking lots have to be done at a certain time before people get to the people are parking there. Our standards of keeping them clear, especially at the Rotary Complex, where we have lots of seniors and different people and different users. They're kept at a little bit of a different standard, and they're done at different times. Like I said, it's the roads and the parking lots. The equipment could do it. It's when they're busy doing roads. I mean, we're doing these other areas, these parking lot areas, and we have the equipment to do it. And I guess there could be a way to look into it, but I wouldn't think it would be really recommended. It's something that works now. The services, the parking lots are done quite well, and the cemetery roads are always kept clear. So I guess it's something we could look at. It's just it's something that's not broken.
Thank you. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the special projects, and that's item 4160. It was 100 in 2020. We didn't allow anything 2020. Anyways, if I could have a clarification on the special projects, 115,000.
Through the chair, the special projects that are budgeted in that area are the two programs that we talked about in the expansion, which is the municipal cultural program and the partnership program.
Okay, I appreciate that.
Excuse me. Anything else from recreation or recreational facilities. Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask about the transfer to reserve funds. It's increased dramatically from 2020. If I could have someone explain that to me, what's happening with that 700 and 5,000.
Mr. St. Louis or
again, those are the transfer to reserve is tax levy based as it supports the capital projects within recreation facilities. And I don't think it's 100%, but Carmen would need to help you.
I see Carmen's hand is up.
Through the chair, yes, I can speak to part of this. It is, again, historically, we haven't had a lot of reserves to rely upon. However, you may recall in a previous treasurer presentation, we did talk a little bit about some unallocated development charges that haven't been utilized correctly. So we had reduced that 705 down to 524. So that's been reflected already in the budget. But the difference between 174 of prior year and 524 is required to support the remainder of the capital projects that are presented.
Thank you. Councillor Vasilakos.
I just had a quick question on the interest on long-term debt, principal on long-term debt. Can you remind me in the recreation, like when that debt is, we used to have a table of all the debt and when it was all done. I may ask that for multiple budgets, so I'm just wondering when this one comes off.
Through the chair, really, I don't have the schedule right at my fingertips, but I can definitely bring that for the next meeting for your information. This particular one relates, I would say, substantially to a debenture that was undertaken. I want to say it's like approximately 10 years ago or 15 years ago, and it was for a 30-year period. So there's still quite a bit left on it. But just a little bit further on this, this is one of the examples where a portion of that debt, we've been utilizing development charges to support that debt, and we will continue to do that. So the levy impact of the debt specifically is a little bit less than that.
So if I may, if rather than me asking tonight as we go through, is that maybe something we can, is it easy enough to pull together for the meeting on the 31st, just to have a look at that debt and then also look at how much of it is tax support, or how much of it is levy supported and how much of it's coming from other sources? It would be just good to get a handle on that. Thanks.
Through the chair, yes, absolutely. It is something that I did not have ready when the budget binders were prepared, but as we approached year end and we were starting to get things a little bit more ready to go for our year end adjustments, I will be able to present that and bring that forward for next meeting. Yes.
Do we need a motion for that? I'm just looking at the clerk. Would you like a motion for that?
Through the chair, as the director has indicated that she's able to bring this information back, I don't believe a motion is required at this time.
Was there anything else in recreation? G731 cemetery. Councillor 7.
Thank you. I just had a question about the full-time salary and wages, and I'm just wondering why there's a pretty significant increase from previous years.
Through the chair, you will see throughout community services that the salaries in full-time now show different splits. So taking into account, let's say, for example, a manager of parks, forestry, and cemetery, his wage is now split within those three divisions. And also in those divisions includes the director and the director's administrative assistant.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anything else? Councillor Clifford.
I was just going to ask about the transfer to reserve fund. it's up substantially, but if I could have someone explain how it's up to 230 from 120.
Carmen?
Yep, I can answer that, and I'll call on the director to assist me on some of the technical stuff. But again, this is another recreation has been historically the one that has not been able to build reserves. So a lot of this transfers to reserves is supporting the current capital budget. So the items in there that we're looking at supporting include the fuel tank removal and replacement at the cemetery, which has been identified as an insurance issue going forward. That's the biggest project, but there's some other adjustment or increases, rather, sorry, proposed capital works relating to the niche walls at the cemetery and the monument leveling and road repairs. So there's like there, but those details are provided in the capital budget supporting documents as well.
Councillor Clifford.
Yeah, I was going to ask on the fuel tanks. I believe I heard from our acting director that we have bought insurance for 2022 to take care of that. And what I'm asking, is it possible that we could, instead of, because we've already bought the insurance and we're covered, could that tank in the cemetery be repaired or changed or brought, whatever we have to do in 2023 instead? I'd like to ask what staff's opinion on that is.
Through the chair, that's a great question. In fact, the reason why we've kept it in part as part of the 2022 budget is we do realize that there's going to be a bit of lead time required in order to go and solicit that contract. But we're hoping we're going to have to be having this implementation prior to 2023's insurance renewal, so that we don't have any exposure risk management to deal with in that period. So I am a little bit concerned already, to be honest, about the timing, because it is possible that we might not have the tanks fully installed given the lead time required prior to our insurance expiring or coverage not being able to be obtained in future years. So we've left it there on purpose, but recognize that potentially the expenditure could be delayed. But whether it's in 2022 or 2023, we're still needing the direction or the approval to proceed with the actual towards the end of work. So I don't know if that answered your question. I apologize if I haven't. Please reiterate it if I have not.
That's fine, thank you.
Okay. Nothing else. We'll move on to transit. Councillor Seven.
Thank you. I had a question about the consultants line. There's typically nothing in it, but this year there's 150,000. I was just wondering what that is.
If I could ask the manager of transit to respond through the chair.
Yes, good evening, through the chair. So consultants fees that I've had part of the budget and part of some capital projects are going to be one of them will be a feasibility study for BEBs, so battery electric buses that I'm looking at for the future. There needs to be some studies on infrastructure as far as overhead charging. We need to work with stakeholders like Festival Hydro. There's a lot of moving parts with it. So, but the first thing is the infrastructure piece and a feasibility study. The other consultant fees will be used for facility design. As I mentioned to council some months ago, the transit garage in the office and the storage barn are in some need of some major upgrades, if not a total rebuild. That's what those consultant fees will be for as well.
Thank you for that. And I did have another follow-up, well, something different, but snow removal. I was just wondering, are you foreseeing an increase in the expense there? Is that why that number is a little higher this year?
Yes, a good question. Through the chair, as with everything lately, things have kind of gone up in price, and that's what reflects that budget number. hopefully being through probably more than halfway through the winter, I'm hoping we should be in decent shape, but fingers crossed. But that's why that value is a little higher than usual. It's just the cost to get it removed or service has gone up.
Thank you.
Item G 751, parallel transit. Councillor Clifford.
I was going to ask about Ontario grants. We in 2021 we got a grant, but I suspect it's a COVID grant. Are we anticipating any grants for 2022?
Through the chair again, Councilor Clifford, you're correct. The $50,000 in 2021 was a COVID grant, and are we expecting further grants in 2022? We sure hope so, but we're unsure.
Mike.
Yes, through the chair, I can elaborate. The SRA funding that transit agencies received, which was a phase 1, 2, and 3 safe recovery agreement, we are allowed to carry over any unused phase 3, which is in fact what we're going to do. So you'll see some Ontario grants in both transit and in the mobility side, only because we had some leftover funds for COVID expenses and for revenue shortfalls.
Thanks, Mike. Corporate services, taxation, general revenues. Sorry, Mayor Matheson.
Councillor Gaffney, as we approach the 4-hour mark, I think your mind can only absorb what your body can endure. And I don't think we make good decisions after we get past 4 hours. I'd like to entertain a motion to adjourn this evening and to pick this up on Monday and to continue the discussion where we're fresh and haven't been sitting in front of computer screens for 4 hours.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with what you say, Your Worship. Before you make that motion, I'd like to ask that the council review the draft capital, because the next time we meet at the end of the meeting, there's a pretty good chance that I as chair will ask the question if there's any other changes or additions or subtractions on the draft capital budget. So if this is allowed by the rules, and I look to the clerk, I'd be more than happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So through the chair, certainly we can complete a motion to adjourn and then consider the remaining items at the January 31st meeting.
Thank you. So moved by His Worship, seconded by Councillor Henderson. Yes. Yes.
I have a question. Should we maybe put aside another date? Just in case, because we're not even halfway through the operating budget. I have concerns we'll go over the 4 hours. I'm wondering if we should put out a survey and see if there's another date. Just an idea.
I think we'll be fine. I can't imagine what we have left to do is going to take another 4 hours. So I don't think it's necessary to pick another date. I don't see anybody trying to stop me from saying that. So if there's nothing else, I'm going to call the question. All those in favor? Opposed, if any. That's carried. Thanks, everybody.